clock toll for 1 o'clock, so I will assume that it's time for us to get started. I'd like to welcome the media and those in the public gallery and staff, and also councillors. We're joined at the table by John Gallagher and David Thompson. John is the chair of GDP, and they will be addressing us on agenda item 8. A little bit of housekeeping for those who have not been in this room before. The toilets are just out this door to my right. If there's a fire alarm, leave the building via the stairs out here that you came up, and assemble in front of the Civic building. And if you can't exit that way, then we exit out of this door through a corridor into the main council building. If either of those aren't available, then just follow the staff. I'm sure they'll know what to do, and I'll probably be in front of them. If there's an earthquake, this building is fairly strong, so it's better to stay inside than go outside, but you might want to hop under something solid. These tables are pretty good, but you'll have to beat the councillors to getting underneath them. Okay, and of course you take any instructions from staff or the wardens. So, getting on to our agenda proper, we have no items today for public forum. Apologies. I'll move that an apology be received from Councillor Sophie Barker. Do I have a seconder? The Mayor, thank you. All in favour? Against? That is carried. Confirmation of the agenda. I'll move that the committee confirms the agenda without addition or alteration. Seconded Councillor Wiley. All in favour? Against? Carried. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any changes to their declarations of interest? Councillor Wiley.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Staines. Chair, on Dunedin Community House, I've gone from Deputy Chair to Acting Chair.
Thank you. Any others? In that case, I'll move that the committee amends the elected members' interest register and amends the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. All in favour? Oh, sorry, seconded Councillor Elder. All in favour? Against? Carried. Confirmation of the minutes. I'll move that the committee confirms the public part of the minutes of the Economic Development Committee meeting held on the 9th of February 2021 as a true and correct record. Seconded Councillor Elder. Any discussion? If not, I'll put it. All in favour? Against? That is carried. Item 6, actions from resolutions of the Economic Development Committee meetings. Mr Christie.
Just happy to take any questions, Chair.
Any questions? Do I have a mover? Oh. You try to find it. Yep. Okay, it's been moved by Councillor Wiley, seconded by Councillor Gary. Any discussion? If not, I'll put it. All in favour? Against? That's carried. Moving on to item 7, the Economic Development Committee Forward Work Programme. Mr Christie, just questions? Yep. Questions, councillors? There being none, would someone like to move? Councillor Elder, Councillor Wiley, seconds. Any discussion? If not, I'll put it. All in favour? Against? That is carried. Item 8, the Dunedin Partnership. John Gallagher and David Thompson, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you for the opportunity to join you this afternoon and provide a brief update with what's going on with the Dunedin partners at the moment. Part of the opportunity is really to perhaps spend a moment or two on a wee bit of context. We have been looking and thinking a lot about where Dunedin is going, what the strategy should and could look like. And I think by way of putting some context around it, about a decade ago, the Grow Dunedin Partnership formed, excuse me, which represented all of the major institutions in the city. And it was a collaborative event that created an economic strategy. And I think we understand that was one of the first of this type of exercise in New Zealand. And it has been particularly helpful, I think, in terms of resetting the priorities for Dunedin and its direction. And I think if we look at a lot of the outcomes that were talked about, 8, 9, 10 years ago, the 10,000 jobs, the $10,000 GDP growth per person, those have been very close to being achieved. And I think that's a very gratifying outcome. And I think one of the other things that for us is a very important thematic is that Dunedin is now a very different place than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there were challenges, plenty of challenges for the city. And I think we have evolved through those challenges. We're not through them all, of course, and there's still a lot more to be done. But the DNA of the city is different. I think the confidence in the city is different, and certainly the growth has emerged now that is giving us confidence. And there's a lot of other initiatives, as we're all aware of, in terms of what's ahead of us over the next 10 years. And I think for us, this is the point at which the economic strategy is on our table. We're starting to talk and think about what it could and should look like and how we go about redeveloping that. It doesn't have to be completely reconstructed. Strategies tend to evolve. And so I think for us at the moment, it's about how should that evolve and how do we start building conversations around that. And importantly, in conjunction with the city and a lot of the key businesses and institutions here, what are going to be the priorities? What are the directions that we could and should go in? And where are our advantages now? And how do we move to make the best advantage of those? So that's been part of the theme that we've been talking about for some time. And, that conversation's been helped considerably. And I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge 3 of the members of the GDP who have joined us in the audience today. We have Jason Tibble, who's the Senior Lead at the Ministry of Social Development, Nikki Aldridge-Masters from the Chamber, and Barbara Bridger, who's the CEO of the Otago Community Trust. And so those people bring, again, valuable and alternative perspectives around the table. And they augment the thinking that's coming out of our institutions particularly. And you'll recall the last time we came and spoke with you, it was about signing off on a terms of reference. It was about allowing some additional resource to be appointed to this group. And we've been through quite an intensive process with a good number of applicants for the roles, and we've chosen to appoint the 2, Barbara and Jason, and they've already added a significant amount of value in the time that they've been with us. As a point, we have a couple of positions still left in terms of that, and we've deliberately chosen to see how the strategic conversation evolves, and importantly, what skill sets we may need in that time. So it's an accretive process, and we want to build a very broad set of capacity and capabilities around the table. So that's sort of the big picture. And if we go back and we think about where we were pre and post COVID, the world is very different. There is a new normal, and that tends to change regularly. But we are making good progress. And these things always throw up opportunities, and I think the city is starting to get its head around what they might be. We produced an ILM earlier on in that time, and looking at the issues that might have emerged in the city and what might we do about it. And that was a very informative process, but pleasingly the pressures that we anticipated passed pretty quickly. The country recovered a lot faster and stronger than many of us might have expected in a normal recessionary period. So we have bounced back. You'll be aware that we set up a very interesting couple of days as a forum with Brainstorm. There were some very interesting conversations came out of that, but I think one of the things was the intangibles, that people just valued the opportunity to think about what the world might look like and be proactive in trying to create solutions. And that's the kind of culture that we are very mindful that we want to develop within the city. I think one of the things that we believe Dunedin is going to be very capable of is it's going to be a lightweight style city. I mean, a lot of the growth that we could see coming is going to be through innovation, is going to be through creating opportunities here with the resources that we have in terms of our educational institutions and the people that are pleasingly choosing to move here because of a lifestyle choice. And the work-life balance, as you'll see in some of the attached documentation, is particularly attractive to a good number of people. And that's slowly, I think, we understand altering the structure of the population. Just before we open up and talk a bit more about the papers that you'll have, we continued through this period really maintaining a strategic view. Our role is not to get too much into the detail. We can't avoid it, but we really want to try to create a good, strong, consistent strategic conversation about where we are going as a city, and trying to bring all of those conversations together in a form that will help the discussions around this table, and importantly to help the people who are building and developing or who already have businesses here in the city. So we are mindful that that's one of the roles that we could and should be playing. And we're still focused on the opportunities in areas that we've presented to you before in film, more particularly in the startup community. There's huge opportunity for us there. Education, we all know and understand. Health, we all know and understand. And likes of Project China and some of the other initiatives that have emanated from the council are still part of what we are keeping our eye on. And I think as an observation, the GDP does acknowledge at the outset that economic development and social development are really two sides of the same coin. So we are looking to try to create the right opportunities in the city that will allow us to do the things that we need to do for the broader population. But we don't pretend to be able to do all of those. We think if we can get the strategic conversation right, a lot of those things will line up, and that will then give the city opportunities to do a lot of the things that people would wish us to do. So we're happy to just open up. You have the papers in front of you. We're very happy to take questions, comments, challenges, and do our best to answer those. And David will clearly keep me on task in terms of the things that we should or shouldn't be saying. But, it's, as I said, we are pleased that we can come along and spend some time with you and just hopefully bring you up to date on where we're at.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Tēnā koroa. Thank you for coming. And thank you for the papers attached to this report. As you say, there were challenges that existed in 2013. Some of those are slightly different now, and one of those is around future construction workforce needs. And so I'm interested, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but in the attached paper where it talks about Dunedin having the highest proportion of the adult population with education qualifications, all well and good, but then the metric of that is bachelor's degrees or above. And I wonder whether that is too narrow a focus for having an educated local workforce.
That's a very fair point. And I think we have taken some comfort in the high level of IQ and EQ that exists in the city. But your point about construction was one of the things that came up very clearly in the brainstorm conversation, in terms of how do we engage and develop and do that. And I think certainly the feedback we have had, particularly from the Polytechnic now, is that they are working very, very hard to fill that gap. It's an opportunity, but as in all these opportunities, putting systems and getting the resource and the training in place takes time. But we have a long tail to deal with, so I'm pretty confident that construction will be one of the bigger growth areas in the city over the next decade forthcoming. I mean, we all know what the projects look like, and there's going to need to be a lot of people. So that job is not a 5-minute job, Aaron. It's going to take probably a year or two to get right up to where we need to be.
Yeah, and thanks. And just a quick question on the implementation plan itself, and it's handy to have this set out like this. The Centre of Digital Excellence, I found it interesting that isn't tagged to linkages beyond our borders of our country, not borders living in our house. But because there are already quite strong links internationally with that project, and I just wondered why that didn't fit.
I suspect that is probably an oversight, but also I think the thinking of the code work at the moment is very much on the establishment phase and is probably much more internally focused.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you both. Really interesting report, and I was gratified to hear you talk about the opportunities for the city in terms of livability, but I wondered if you'd care to comment around the something that was always thought of as a weakness in a way for Dunedin, and that's the distance from the rest of the world in this post-COVID, or it's not really post-COVID, but in this global pandemic environment that's now being seen as a real positive. How important, you touched on it briefly, is that livability and quality of life and the getting out in nature has been a quote that I've often heard from people around that time, that the closeness to the environment, alongside the jobs, the level of remuneration for jobs and the GDP growth. How important is that, do you think, in our future?
I think it's now one of the more important factors. I mean, in every organisation that I've had any conversations with over the last 6 to 9 months, the ability to create a work-life balance, but also be mindful of employees and business owners' well-being. And I think the quality of life becomes more predominant in those conversations now. And I have always felt that Dunedin has got a unique size and scale, and when we went right back to the days when we were shaping up the Gig City conversation, one of the things that we understood is that we were a great small city, but we had everything that any city would be envious of, bigger cities in every part of the world. So we shouldn't overlook those things as part of that answer to your question. And I think, in terms of how we present ourselves to the world, I think that is an attractive situation. And we certainly still see that as also being married up with making it an attractive place for, the more entrepreneurial and the younger generation to come and either not leave or to come back, which is happening. And then there are people, I believe, that are new entrants to the city. And in a lot of cases, that's the reason why. They see here a city that presents them with all of the things that are important to them now, and that order has changed significantly.
Thank you for that answer, and I've got a second question. On Saturday morning I spoke at the Building Apprentice of the Year competition, and I wonder if that message about the extraordinary career path that young people have if they get into the trades is reaching young people as they're choosing what to do. Given we know we're going to need a lot of people in those areas.
It's a real challenge matching that. There's no doubt. So I think, from what I can see, and certainly from what I know of the study choices that young people are making, it's certainly in the consciousness, but whether it's in the consciousness on the scale that's required to deliver the sort of workforce we have, that's another question altogether. But there's a whole lot of work. I mean, one of the strands of work that came out of the brainstorm was diversity in the construction workforce. There are opportunities to actually tackle that in new ways, and I think that's one of the things we're really going to have to grapple with and work on.
As an observation, one of the things that came out of the brainstorm was a recognition that a lot of the ideas that were presented there, and they were all unique, they were all clever ideas, but the ones that made the most sense were in fact being worked on in other forums, and in some of the ministries and in some of the bigger departments with a lot more resource. So the trick is then to marry that enthusiasm up with people who are already in place. And it was never designed, for example, to say, look, we can see an opportunity coming out of here that the ratepayer could or should fund. That wasn't what it was about. And so those projects are continuing on in the background. But it seems at the moment that in the construction sector, and to be fair, we probably don't have full visibility on just the initiatives that are going on there, but that has to be to their advantage to be out there promoting that around, all of the schools and so on here. That would make a whole lot of sense, but we probably couldn't be specific in terms of what initiatives are going on there.
I'm just going to add a particular challenge we also face, obviously, is that the overseas workforce, the migrant workforce construction, is gone from the economy at the moment. And if you look at Christchurch, the Christchurch rebuild, that was a significant portion of the labour market in the construction. So it's not just about, we've got a big hole to replace, not just from increased activity, but from a changed workforce.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions. The first one, there was a point that we were the third highest ranked city for having jobs in what they call the knowledge economy, or knowledge jobs. And I'm just wondering what determines a knowledge-intensive job? Like, where's the start and stop of that? Oh, sorry, that was it's page 38 of our report.
So that would be the attachment on the benchmark comparisons? Is that the one you're referring to?
And it said employment in knowledge-intensive industries, and I just wonder where that starts and stops, what you determine as knowledge-intensive.
Might just ask if we could ask Benji to come forward. Probably got the most accurate response to that, Councillor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. It's a technical definition that's used, and it's from data we've got out of Infometrics. And so, to be classified as knowledge intensive, an industry must satisfy two basic criteria: at least 25%. Oh, thank you. At least 25% of the workforce must be qualified to degree level, and at least 30% of the workforce must be employed in professional, managerial, as well as scientific and technical occupations.
Thank you. And the other question I was just going to ask in relation to Project China, has the sort of different rhetoric coming out between New Zealand and Australia and the Foreign Minister had any effect on our relationships in China, and do we have any concerns about that going forward?
No, it hasn't, is the short answer, and we've got ongoing channels of communication with our partners in China, which are still very positive, and we would see, obviously, China is going to be a very important part of rebuilding our economy in many years to come.
Thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for your work and the vision embodied in your statements. One of the issues that Council is going to be confronting in the short term is the development required by government of a future development strategy, which for us will be, among other things, a rework of the whole spatial policy and so on, which seems to me a really important dimension to what you're talking about socially and in terms of our built environment. I just want to make sure that you've got this on your radar, because it's not there at the moment, and it's only just arrived for us anyway. And also I expect I won't need to ask for an assurance that you'll be intimately and fully involved in the development and comment on that process as it proceeds.
I think you can take that as a given, yes. I mean, we're just beginning the strategic conversation now and just starting to understand how we can best engage in the rework of the one that's already in existence, as I said at the outset, and understanding what, you know, the outcomes the city prefers to see and how that will work. So it's about trying to develop a conversation and then using the resources that we have around the table, which represent you know, a substantial perspective on the major institutions. Hopefully we can add value to that conversation. But the thing we've come to understand over the last 6 or 7 years is that things have evolved, and so we're dealing with things that we hadn't contemplated when the economic strategy was initially constructed, and I'm quite sure that that'll be the same thing again. But it's about us being able to make sure that we've got the right methodologies for the conversations and taking that input and advice as much as what we're doing from the outside in.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting for a moment that your work hasn't aligned well with Council's strategic decisions and directions.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that you're aware of the next stage in that, because that's got to continue to be so well coordinated. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, probably a question for you, are you able to break down between genders, you know, or dare I bring up the gender issue? I mean, I was thinking, I was thinking men and women? I mean, I just wondered the female and the male, but of course there's other genders, of course, to take into account. I don't want to miss anyone out. But I just wondered how women fare in the business sector, you know, and is there any way of seeing that? Like, for example, with startups, we've got, okay, we're not leading the way yet. I say yet, very positively. But we have had an increase. So it'd be interesting to know, are some of those, you know, women who've set up businesses, or are they mostly men? And, you know, in a lot of these statistics, it's got figures, but it doesn't say, are they, you know, what, you know, it's difficult today to say what woman or gender, you know, so, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for your question. When it comes to business startups, there's not good demographic data attached to the entries of new businesses into the company's register. There are opportunities to explore self-employment by gender within the census.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so we could find out that at some stage, because that would be useful, just to know whether women are falling behind or whether they're doing really well. Also, so I wondered, is there anything to say why we've had that increase from 2013 to 2020 in the for the startup community in the growing business sector there on page 39?
Yeah, we saw that business startup rates increased across New Zealand, and that was because of the economic cycle. Generally, startup rates go higher when economic growth is strengthened.
Yes, and I noticed later in this report, it might have been the attachment, it mentioned the Pacifica and women, I think, were lower, were not shown as, you know, as predominantly as men. Does that mean that Māori were doing well, or were they because they weren't mentioned? That's what made me wonder. Oh, that's interesting. Is there?
If I may, could we perhaps talk about that with the next paper?
Oh, next paper, sure. Okay. I've got one other question, but it may come under the next paper. It talks quite a bit about owner of a property. It's the exact term is, where is it? Where it states, it's referred to in all the statistics there, and owner-occupied property operation, I think they call it. And I'm wondering, is that referring to like people who've got rental investments?
Could we please? That's in the next
paper.
Yes,
okay,
please.
All right, lovely, thank you.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, so possibly a two-part question pertaining to all three. So in the graph on page 37, showing the residents who have a bachelor's degree and above, we seem to have performed to a lesser degree than Hamilton and Christchurch, and the rest of New Zealand, and certainly Auckland. And but in particular, Hamilton and Christchurch, where we were looking well and seem to have slipped relative to them. So first part is, do you have a range of things that you might ascribe that to? What are your thoughts on what may have caused that over the previous 5 years, 13 to 18? And what is the growing Dunedin Partnership plan to improve that, given that that's part of the brief, as it were?
Benji, do you want to make any comments about the constituents inside that number?
Just that compared with Hamilton and Christchurch, the gaps are relatively quite small. And when it comes to Wellington and Auckland in particular, it's more to do with the nature of the types of occupations that are there. Even though Dunedin educates a very large share of New Zealand's population, we see there's quite a migration pathway after university to Wellington and Auckland.
So to add to that, Jules, one of the themes that we're starting to think a little bit more about now is how, as I think in answer to Councillor Gary's question, how do we make the city more attractive to those people that we're training, that we're teaching, or that are becoming graduates out of our university or out of our polytechnic? And one of the things, we link this through to try to drive some of the growth in the startup area and the entrepreneurial area as much as anything else. And so we are trying to think about how and see whether there is a way in which we can do that. And I mean, the numbers don't have to be substantive. We don't need to keep thousands of students here, but if we can create an opportunity for them to continue to stay post-graduation, live and work here, then those numbers will rectify themselves. But it is that literally that we teach a lot and then we export a lot. Not the sort of things we want to try and stop the export, but if we can.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I was one of the exports and I came back, so we have to hope people will come back. We're going to be talking about studying Dunedin later, but I just wanted to ask you a question about the export education goals that you have there in the document on page 42. In your thinking at the time, because I'm not sure whether it was prior to the announcement of the government around reviewing immigration, but we certainly heard in our meetings with the ambassadors and high commissioners recently that there are students waiting to come here and they can't because of immigration issues. Was that part of your thinking when you wrote that goal? Because it certainly is an obstacle.
That specifically was not part of our thinking, but we were well aware that the government is engaging in a major reset of international education for the country, and the dimensions of that reset actually aren't fully clear yet. So it's actually a strand of work that will require significant work as that becomes clearer. Obviously that government reset is not something we control in any ways. We can influence it and make our case, and having, coming from the university, we have students who are offshore at the moment and can't get back onshore to complete their studies. So it is quite a significant issue. It will play out, and it will play out not just in the tertiary education sector, but it will play out in the way that government resets education in the school sector, and that's probably the more significant reset in my view. The government's already made some quite clear signalling around international students in below secondary level, and let's see what comes next.
I guess if I reframed it, I was wanting to know if you think this is still a realistic goal.
Not in the short term. The likely recovery period for tertiary education is probably 5 to 10 years.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I think just an additional comment. I mean, in the conversations we've had, I mean, we recognise that education is and probably should be a continuing part of the strength of this local economy. So it stays on the table. But exactly what David was saying, I mean, we don't know the how and when yet, but we have an enormous opportunity given the resources we already have, and there must be a way at some point, once we've got some clarity, to be able to leverage that. So that's where we sit at the moment.
I guess one other point that's really important, export education we think about as being international students coming into our city, but actually students from elsewhere in New Zealand coming to our city add economic value as well. And when the borders are closed to international students, then an obvious strategy is to pursue students from other parts of New Zealand. And that's something that both the major tertiary providers have done very successfully this year, and I would imagine we'll try and do again next year. It's obviously a lot harder for schools because it's much more linked to families having jobs here and settling here.
Thank you very much for your answer.
Councillor Elder.
Just a couple of questions. Thank you, Chair. The graph on page 38, Dunedin's export revenue growth, and I'm looking at that statistic, and 2008 to 2013 we were in the minuses, and we lost Cadbury's, Fisher and Paykel, freezing works, and a lot of semi-skilled and skilled workers. And now we're looking at 13 to 19, and I was just wondering if there could be some commentary about where the growth has been for Dunedin, which is a really great news story, really, a fantastic news story.
Yeah, so some of the 2008 to 2013 period was that hollowing out of manufacturing, and while some of that did continue in the period thereafter, there's also been significant growth in other sectors across the city and more broadly into the region. So I don't have the specific contributions, commodity by commodity, but it's the kind of general overview.
It is a great news story, and the entry rate in growing business is starting to climb up, and I was just wondering if you could have any comment on that as well, and how our ecosystem as a city has improved that, albeit, it's still down a bit, but it is improving.
So I might pass over either side in a minute, but I think we've got to be very clear what that graph showing is the percentage of new firms to existing firms in our economy. We're doing better than we were. I mean, one of the reasons we probably don't have a higher percentage is we have a lot of firms that stay here for a long period of time, and that's actually a real positive. So if we were 100%, it would be terrible because it would mean that no firms were here for more than the period of time. So it's a bit of a mix. You've got a sense, John, of...
I think that's again one of the longer term perspectives that you can take, and I think I would answer the question in another way in saying, the percentage of new firms to existing firms were behind the eight ball a little bit compared to other cities, and being naturally competitive, I think thinking to myself, so how do we get up to speed in that area, which is my comment earlier about developing the entrepreneurial spirit. And I would acknowledge in that comment the work that has been done by Startup Dunedin and the support that the council provided some time ago in terms of the funding. The payback for that funding has been significant, and it was very gratifying to see that happen, and we would strategically see that as one of the key initiatives that we want to keep working with and keep growing and keep finding ways to make the city more attractive for those people, and we'll look to rectify that. Even though we are behind a little bit now, that simply gives us a great opportunity to pick up, and I think we can do that because the whole comment earlier about lifestyle, well-being, where we are and what we have here, that all comes into the mix when you're looking at how do you grow businesses now in this new post-COVID environment. So people aren't necessarily worried about going to a big city and driving for an hour and a half to get the magic job. They're more interested now in actually having a life and a lifestyle and still doing things, and they've learned that they can do that remotely. Remotely is not quite the right word, but they can do it from home, online, but they can still do what they want to do and they don't have to be somewhere else. So I think we need to start thinking more about how those things can come together as a package for the city.
Any other questions, councillors?
Happy to move.
Thank you. And Councillor Wiley, you indicated to second. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us and giving us all an update.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So it's been moved, Councillor Elder, seconded Councillor Wiley. Is there any discussion? If not, Councillor Wiley.
I was waiting for the mover to speak to it, but that's okay. I just want to thank John and the team from Grow Dunedin. When we look at the people that we've got sitting at the table, with John leading it, David, Jason, Nikki and Barbara that were in attendance here today, and then adding in Donna Matahari Adariki, Megan Gibbons, Virginia Nichols, along with the staff support from John and Des and Fraser. There is a lot of very positive things happening. The project proposals for 21-22 are very exciting, and I think this all makes a clear vision of where our city is going. And I think for many years there was a lack of vision of where we're heading. Then when we overlay that with the benchmarking comparisons with the other New Zealand cities, I think anybody that is looking to see what is the city doing and how are we moving forward as a council and how are the big players around the city moving forward together will clearly get a good feeling and vibe of what is going on. Yes, there are economic goals and they are improving. But we would all agree that the work-life balance that Dunedin offers is going to make us a very attractive place going forward. And I just want to touch on a point that David Thompson just made, was the fact that actually you can live in Dunedin and enjoy the qualities of Dunedin, but work internationally. And I see that day to day as my wife works 5,000 kilometres away from my son's bedroom. And I think that is going to be the advantage that Dunedin is going to have, and I've always seen that. And the fact of where Grow Dunedin works and the partnerships it builds is really going to make our city even stronger going forward. Thank you.
And speaking to this, I think what we've heard and what we are seeing is that our city's economy has changed quite a lot over the last few years. So since the strategy was adopted, we're seeing quite a bit of change, and we could say, well, some of that may be as a result of COVID-19 in the more recent time, but there is no doubt that where our jobs are and where our future jobs will be are changing quickly. And so that means that there is a need, probably an urgent need, to take another look at our strategy. I know in the discussions at the table, as I sit on GDP, there is a concern that some aspects of the strategy and the plans that were attached to it at that time no longer are relevant and need to be updated. I think the work that John as chair and our full GDP membership and our new members in particular has refreshed GDP, and now means that there is a strong drive amongst the partners and the independent members to get on and get stuff done. And I think that is very heartening. Any other speakers? Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to disagree with one of my colleagues. Councillor Wiley said we had a lack of vision. Well, I would disagree with that and say the vision has changed. And it's changed because the circumstances have changed. What I see in this, these strategies and plans and vision that the Grow Dunedin Partnership has presented us with, and the commentary around it, is a really exciting opportunity. And who would have thought a year ago that we would be talking so positively? But I always think of that Chinese symbol, as I understand it, that is for crisis, is also means opportunity. And isn't that true now? We were always considered at the bottom of the world, and that was seen as a disadvantage previously, but it's now seen as an advantage. And the importance of livability and quality of life has never been more important. And the number of times that I've heard newcomers to our city or people who haven't been here long talking about getting out into nature and how important that was during lockdown and last year, and that new appreciation of the environment we live in this beautiful city with the harbour right next to it, and that different appreciation of how much well-being and family life is and that work-life balance. It's like we've had this reset already. Long way to go yet, but I certainly see that in these visions and plans, and I thank the Grow Dunedin Partnership for all the thought that's gone into it. I was interested to read the part about export education, and I take the point it's a two-way thing, but some of those aspects are going to be beyond our control, and we're going to need to lobby hard around immigration and the ability of those students who are waiting to come here to be able to do so. So this is very positive as a way forward for our city, and I look forward to when the strategy takes into account not only GDP and our remuneration income increasing, but that quality of life and well-being that we've talked about, and I know that has certainly been taken on board. And I thank Councillor Staines for his efforts to date on the GDP, and to Mr Gallagher and team going forward in his leadership. It's an exciting time for this city.
Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank Councillor Benson-Bope for raising the spectre of the spatial plan in relation to this work. It reminds me that the success of our economic development strategy can't rely on the people that sit within our economic development unit. And when we're looking at the kind of people that we are seeking to attract to the city or seeking to retain in the city, the question of livability and what those people not just want but increasingly expect in a city is something that we need to consider. And those are things like being able to bike safely to work and having a public transport system that functions in a city that takes its natural environment seriously and has public realm space in the city centre that's designed for people. When you are competing in the market for people who have the luxury of choosing where they want to live and work, these are exactly the kinds of things that we need to be focused on. And so it's great sitting around the table at this committee talking about the support that we have for the economic development strategy, but I would urge colleagues when we're sitting around in different committees and council meetings when those subjects and those papers come before us to remember the relationship that has with the success or otherwise of what we are trying to do in terms of building a sustainable future economy for the city. But I commend the work that has been done. It's great to get an update on it, but certainly it can't be left to the team that we have in the room today to be able to carry the burden of its success. Thanks.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the Grow Dunedin Partnership is extraordinarily aptly named, and as is obvious from the questions I raised in the matter of what government is now requiring of us, that alignment by that group and its parts to what we have in our other strategic documents, direction, vision, is absolutely critical, and I have no criticism whatsoever of how that has progressed in the past. I think we are fortunately at a very good place, and we're all currently singing the same song about the quality of this environment in every sense. And I think the mix of economic focus and social focuses and environmental focus are absolutely key to what we need to bear in mind cohesively as we go forward. I haven't got much to add to what the Mayor just said, but in terms of the wider physical developmental challenges for the city, we often see individuals worried about their patch or their circumstances. They unfortunately don't see the wider picture that we have to make decisions about. And in my view, the policy decisions this organisation has made in respect of both the second generation district plan and the two variations, and one more coming up shortly, to correct things that are wrong, are being worked through professionally and thoroughly and in line with policy that we have agreed. And if we want to make the best of our compact, livable, accessible city, that's exactly what we have to do. We have to make the right decisions about transport of all kinds. We have to make the right decisions about housing, what type of housing and where it is. And isn't it ironic, no one will have missed it, that not only is Wellington suddenly leading the way a bit about some urban design issues, but they're also stumbling simultaneously over the questions of inner city intensification because of entrenched views about which suburbs should be more densely inhabited. So in many ways we remain at the forefront. The infometrics data in the following paper supports a great deal of to a large extent that same statement, and I have to say also, as I will say in due course, supports the amazing importance of our tertiary education and tertiary sector in particular. And I haven't mentioned the fact that we haven't done the tertiary streets upgrade as we were anticipating to, but the argument remains very strong.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I have concerns about the comments made by the Mayor and Councillor Benson-Pope. This is the Economic Development Committee. Please don't start putting, well, anyone suggest or put pressure. I'm not saying anyone's putting pressure, but just in case anyone's thinking about it, on Grow Dunedin Partnerships to become a traffic calming committee. We don't want more of that in our city. I mean, this is, you know, I'm not sure why we're talking about this now when we're talking about economic development, about startups, about our innovative startup sector, about our entrepreneurs, about our business hopes and dreams for our city. I'm not sure how we bring in, you know, spatial pedestrianisation into that, but yes, we have to consider everything, but it's quite a different, you know, I'm not sure where we're going with that.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Point of order.
I'm sorry, I've got a problem with the relevance of the comments, Mr. Chairman. I can't recall anyone mentioning pedestrianisation or traffic calming or any of the other examples that have been given. In fact, I rather thought the comments made by the Greater Dunedin representatives was entirely supportive of completely cohesive planning across all our strategic documents. And certainly what I was intending to say, and it's what I interpreted the Mayor to say as well.
Just take a small break. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Walker, seconded by Councillor Wiley. Don't leave the table, please. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. I will rule on the point of order. I uphold it under 25.2c. And I just note that the issues raised by the previous speakers did not cover some of the items that you are attributing to them. But please carry on.
Thank you. Yes, what I also want to say is I think it's exciting, a lot of the plans we have for our city around economic development, and that's what I think we should focus on in this committee. A lot of people in our community feel like they've been, excuse the pun, railroaded, but are getting railroaded with some of our traffic decisions and to say, making comments that this committee cannot be held responsible for all the things in our city when they are the committee we've appointed for economic development. I'm not sure what that means either. So I hope that we can look towards our experts that we've got on Grow Dunedin Partnership, which I'm delighted we've got some really great people, and I hope we look to them for advice around business and economic development. Thank you.
Councillor Elder, your right of reply.
Well, I was really excited by this report, in particular the growth of sports after 2013. Grow Dunedin Partnership is valuable in the sense that it is partners across the city. We've got exciting new members that can enable big picture thinking, and this is really important for Dunedin. They can also follow through on the implementation of the strategies we've already got around economic development code and all the other areas that we're looking at. Another exciting aspect of this partnership is their input into the review of our strategies, which is really important in the sense that we are now in a different climate than what we were even a year ago. So I'm really excited about the possibilities of this partnership and the big picture thinking, and also the follow through on the strategies that we've already got. So it's really good to hear this. Thank you.
I'll put it. All in favour? Aye. Against? That is carried. Item 9, Dunedin City Annual Economic Update Profile. Benji and Des, welcome to the table. Do you wish to speak to it or just receive questions?
Just receive questions is fine, thank you. Councillor Staines.
Councillor Lord.
Thanks, Benji. Look, interesting report. I was just noting on page 45 about the mean annual earnings growth according to our $10,000 strategy. Now, do you think with this post-COVID world, I talk to a lot of people, they're struggling to get people to fill positions and that sort of thing. Do you think that is actually inhibiting that financial goal? Or is that a possibility that is?
Sorry, could you please rephrase slightly?
So on 45, mean annual earnings and growth. So we've got a strategy goal that will increase wages by $10,000. Now, do you think that at the moment part of the problem, I mean, like I talk to a lot of people, I mean, in the rural sector, for example, a lot of people can't get employees from overseas, and there's, people that aren't getting employees. Do you think that will be affecting, and it'll be the same in university and all sorts of places, people can't get here for jobs? I just wonder, is that a problem? Is that a recognised problem?
Thanks for your question. Yes, there has been difficulty in finding labour. That's been reported throughout the country, and it's at all parts of the skills spectrum. It's particularly for skilled labour, but also for semi-skilled and increasingly even in unskilled positions. Undoubtedly in some sectors that is adding some wage pressure. But at the same time, we are seeing that job numbers have recovered somewhat from where they were immediately post lockdown, and what we're seeing is that there's some difficulties in transitioning people from industries that have fallen and haven't yet recovered, and those that are growing quite strongly, because those transitions can take time. Some of it can be because your skills are not necessarily suited to the new industry.
Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is, as ever, a thorough portrait of a moment in time. It's a moment in the before times, unfortunately, and because we talk a lot about overall things are holding up, but what's of interest to us, I think, is how the different parts of the local economy have shifted, because those balances have shifted. So what value do you see for this report in terms of the forward-looking conversations we're having around how to support economic development in the city?
So we acknowledge that some of the data in this particular report is slightly out of date. Some of that's a function of that it comes from taxation records, which takes some time to filter back out the other end. To try and improve our understanding of the here and now, we've made use of some partial indicators that don't necessarily capture all forms of employment, but do capture some of them. And so we've listed some of those in the in this report, and they showed that job numbers, were on par in March of this year compared with the previous year, and that there were some industries that were expanding significantly, particularly health, construction and public administration, which is government services, and that offset some areas, particularly the visitor economy, that were declining. Now, when we're looking at the distributional outcomes, it's also possible to see in data from MSD that we have seen some of the effects of the pandemic have disproportionately been felt on Māori and Pacifica as well as women. But I would note that those effects haven't been as strong in Dunedin as they have been in other parts of the country.
Because those demographics are disproportionately represented in service industries and the like?
Yeah, that's correct. And I'd also add that youth often fall into that situation. So it is one of these confronting situations, in that people that are in more vulnerable employment situations often before crises are also those that are most disproportionately affected by them.
They're not particularly well represented in the infrastructure industries that we invested heavily in at a national level in response. Do these reports will this report always take this long to compile, or is it a particular challenge of the last 12-month period that's taken this long?
They always take a very long time to compile. If you can imagine, we've just finished the March financial year, and people are still getting their data to their accountants, so it takes quite a long time till that comes out. But there has been a period of innovation in the public sector, and we're quite fortunate that we now do get our hands on some of the payday tax roll filings from people that are on PAYE. So these timings have come forward slightly, and we've commissioned a partial update report from Infometrics, which we anticipate getting over the coming months to bring back to a committee meeting.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, that was the points I was trying to raise before, is on page 45, number 15, which has been slightly covered there. So you mentioned before Māori, so they're not written in here, it just says Pacifica, but can we assume that Māori are affected in the same way there? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. If I recall from the top of my head, the effects on Māori were very, very small in Dunedin comparatively.
And why do you think that is?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay. And my next question you might not be able to answer either, but I'm wondering with women, why is it that women are, because women are often low in statistics for these things, and why do you think that is? I think I know, it's because of probably the flexibility with children, but would you say that's the case?
Well, in terms of why they're affected following crises, it's often to do with the nature of the types of roles they're doing and their employment situations.
Are we known as a city for being flexible to be child friendly for working mothers? Is there any statistics we can find on that?
I couldn't answer that. There's none that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lefiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chairman. Tēnā kōrua, thank you both. I think my question is for Mr. Christie or Chief Executive, and it relates to item 4 of the paper regarding the economic development strategy on page 43. Forgive me for my lack of concentration. I think I've asked you this question before, but in the the work of the Manahau too, the strategic refresh, is this going to be, the strategy going to be refreshed to reflect the 4 well-beings?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's actually a question around the dates. This is mostly the 2020 financial year data set by the look of it, isn't it? So really the calendar year 2019 into March 2020. So, because I know there's a lot of questions being mentioned about COVID, but COVID had barely hit the economy at that point. And I know you're saying that you've tried to bring data in from Statistics New Zealand to bring us in to get something for this year. But generally speaking, most of the numbers we're talking here up to March 2020.
Yes, that's correct. Points 10 through 16 in the report are the only data we have in this report post when the pandemic began.
And and I guess my next question will be, and you've sort of partially answered it already, obviously people are only just filing in their final end of year stuff now, so when does the data set come around that we can actually look at the current financial year that's just finishing and the actual effect that the pandemic had on the economy there?
So to answer your question in 2 parts, usually Infometrics releases these reports in February each year, because that's based on the earliest dates that they can get the data and go through it. In the meantime, the partial indicators we've got from Statistics New Zealand, we get them with only a few weeks lag, but the challenge with them is they don't include earnings from people who are business owners or self-employed. They're only from payday tax filings.
Excellent, thanks. And then just to the figure 2, it's on page 51, annual GDP growth up to 2020, New Zealand and Dunedin. If you look at that curve, I would say that Dunedin is now up near the New Zealand average for the last couple of years, but was consistently below it for the years up to that. And it gets back to, I guess, the previous item you talk about percentage growth. If you're coming from a lower point, you will obviously, your denominator is smaller. So when you go from being below up to the line, then you'll have a greater rate of change than the average. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Councillor Raddick.
Page 75.
population source of Dunedin City, natural increase versus net migration. Really, really high increase through 2014, and then quite a steady decline between the 16 and 19, and a rapid increase in the 2020. So first thing is, do you know the source of these figures, and do you have any idea what caused those three things? Two rapid growths and the steady decline.
Thanks for your question. To answer the source of these figures, these are from Statistics New Zealand population estimates, which is a combination of census data at those intervals, coupled with using government administrative records from the electoral roll and MSD addresses and that kind of thing, and taxation. Now, in terms of the trajectory, I can speak in broad terms that that net migration lifted across New Zealand as fewer people were crossing the Tasman and more New Zealanders were beginning to return. And then in the Dunedin context, in particular over the past couple of years, we've seen, adding to international migration, there's been a sharp increase in regional migration from other parts of New Zealand. And it was really quite apparent in 2020. That was up sharply on 2019 for those figures. Now, the 2020 estimate of international migration to New Zealand, which is within that line, there is a risk it's a slight overstatement because of the way that Statistics New Zealand estimates the data. Basically, they look at border crossings, and if someone has been in New Zealand for more than 12 of the last 16 months, they're classified as a migrant. But because of the pandemic, there have been a lot of people on temporary visas that haven't necessarily left, and so it's possible that some of that does wash out down the track.
Great, thank you. I have another question, but I would just comment that now that you've mentioned that, when I look across...
Comments, Councillor Riddick.
Oh, well,
it's
I
questions.
think it's relevant for everyone in the room. Does your assessment of the Dunedin population graph tie into the graph on page 74, which shows Dunedin versus City, an actual similar curve in 14 and 19?
I'm sorry, I don't have a chart on me of that, but I would note that while population growth has risen sharply in the city, it's often been below the New Zealand average.
Yes. Do you think there's a correlation between the low percentage of self-employed people and business owners in Dunedin and the low income earnings of the population of Dunedin?
So the primary reason for low self-employment is because of the nature of industries, so because of the high share of health and education. And these sectors, while there's some very high earning people in them, particularly in the house sector, there's actually quite a high share of low income earners within it as well. So you can see from the productivity statistics, it's actually not as high as you'd think.
Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. On page 53, it states at the top on number 5 that the second largest was education training, followed by construction. But the property owners is 8.6 and construction's 8.4. So I'm just wondering what, are you able to just expand on what property owner encompasses? What exactly does that cover? Would that be property investors?
Yeah, so this is under it's designed and under GDP to get the benefits that derive from housing. So it's a way of capturing the value added from the benefits you get from housing.
Yes.
It's a conceptual issue, yeah.
And does that include property investors, that percentage, the 8.6?
Yes, some of those services, though also some of the services of I'm trying to think of the word, some of the property managers that will get, for example, students into housing, they would also fall under rental hiring and real estate services.
Yes. So student accommodation, would it be fair to say, looking at this as the third most economic benefit to our city, is that right? Among broad industry, if I'm reading that correctly, I might not be, but that's why I'm asking you the question. Because it's got education second, and then you've got this one, but it's 8.4, so property is 8.6, is obviously higher, so it must be the third highest. Is that correct?
Because it's not it's an interesting one. Because it's not a distinct industry. It's a service that comes out of housing. It would be hard to classify it in that way.
Right, we've got no data to show around what student accommodation and the benefits of that to our city. Have we got any way of showing that?
Not specifically at this level of detail. We'd have to go into a much more detailed data set to tease that out.
Okay, but it's clear to see here it is definitely a benefit to our city. Would that be fair to say? Our third highest benefit. At 8.6.
Yeah, but it's not specifically to do with student accommodation.
No, but the property sector.
The property sector is certainly quite a large share of the economy, but it's not just captured within that one. It's also within real estate, as well as within construction. But some of that, for example, in construction will be residential housing, while some of it is commercial and civil construction. So if we were to take a broad look at the housing market's contribution, we'd need to come at it from a slightly different angle.
Because we do seem to have, unless I've read that wrong, a separate area for construction. See, it's got, the construction is underneath that. They're 8.4, but the property owner is 8.6.
So was there a question?
Yes, is that correct? Construction's separate.
Yeah, so I guess I'll take a step backwards and just describe how GDP's broken down. So we have a total figure there, and then what happens is Statistics New Zealand, they have a system of trying to break it down into different industries, and so some of those will be the service you derive from a product, while some of it might be the creation of that underlying product. So a good example would be construction would be the creation of housing, and then owner-occupied property operations would be the actual benefit that gets derived from the service, and then there's other peripheral things that feed in and help, like real estate and wholesale trade, for example, would have construction supplies that feed into the sector.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, so you're saying under the 8.6, construction is still part of that, even though there's a separate construction section?
No, construction's a separate.
Yes, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. Just going to page 75, and what is the source of Dunedin's population growth, and looking at the graph, it's rising steeply. What are the what's coming out of Statistics New Zealand in relation to that growth post-COVID-19?
Yeah, so we have data up to June 2020 in their population estimates, and they showed that there was a steep increase in regional migration from other parts of New Zealand and international migration. The regional migration data is easier to trust, that it's a true and fair indication. The international migration data, I believe, and this is my conjecture, knowing how the data is produced, I believe it could be an overstatement, because there are some people that were still in New Zealand but have since slipped away, and they just technically fell under the definition of a migrant but weren't intending to stay long term. And that's something in some national level data sets that's been talked about quite frequently as a problem with the migration statistics at present.
Is there also any commentary about New Zealanders wanting to return to New Zealand in that?
Yeah, that's been something that's certainly helped, but the numbers that have been coming back haven't been enough to justify such a sharp uplift.
My next question is actually just around housing affordability on page 80, and what I was going to ask is relation to inward migration and returning New Zealanders, etc. Is that affordability graph following that population growth graph?
So this is a situation, I guess, where the data, it being slightly out of date, is more telling. There has been a much sharper deterioration recently to housing affordability than our population growth trends would suggest, and that's been attributed in part to the cheap availability of credit over the past year, ultra low interest rates.
The other question I had was on page 89 and looking at the graph, annual average tourism employment 2001 to 2020, and just commentary around the sharp dip here that we've got related to employment and tourism, and that was pre-COVID.
Unfortunately, I don't think I'd be in a position to answer that because I'm not sure as to exactly how that's been modelled by Infometrics in their report, but I can come back to you.
Thank you, that would be good.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr Chair. My question relates to page 37 of the Infometrics data, table 15. In looking at the top half a dozen, 6, 7, clearly the numbers of people employed in primary education and secondary education are pretty easy to quantify. But I'm wondering how confident you are that this information is robust in terms of the first two, given the number of multiply employed around the hospital sector, if you see what I mean. I mean, higher education, non-hospital is pretty clear, and I assume that's all tertiary. But we know that a large number of people in the hospital are also on the university payroll. Are you confident there's no double counting there?
I'm not confident at all. There could be double counting because these are filled jobs. So what that means is that they're not one employed person. One employed person could have 2 jobs. Right. They could have 1.2 jobs. So it's possible. So
they're not full-time equivalents or anything. They are, if you happen to work in both sectors, you count twice.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Benji, I know some of the information that we really want to get stuck into for like March 31st, 2021 isn't quite here. But I do see you've made commentary on house prices previously in the last month about Dunedin house prices, and where are they at these days, and are you able to point those into a graph for us? So, and I'm relating to page 79 of our papers, page 31 of your report.
Sorry, which page again?
Page 31 of your report or page 79 of our papers. And what I'm asking is, do you have the 2021 figure for the housing affordability or the house average price?
I don't have the figure off the top of my head available. I do know that house price growth did pick up over the past year, and there's a lot of uncertainty regarding, what's currently happening in the housing market. Some indicators have suggested that it's still very, very strong, but others have suggested it could be things like a lack of supply on the market. So we're probably going to need to put a few more months behind us to really get a feel for, how that strength, if it's continuing, or whether some of the policy measures brought in by central government have softened things somewhat. Okay, I just saw a commentary in an ODT article back in May where you said the average house price in Dunedin gone to $621. And then I compare that to the $495 from this paper, and obviously that's quite a jump, and so obviously that graph, that orange line, would shoot up quite extensively, and I'm wondering where that, if you had any data or thoughts on where that green line was going, was that shooting up to a similar pathway or similar or lesser? So the growth between the housing affordability in Dunedin is a lot more severe than the rest of the country. So are you referring to which figure, sorry? The one on page 79. The orange line represents the... Figure 25.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Figure 25, yes.
Yeah. So the green line is for New Zealand has most certainly increased, and in Dunedin it's at least held at that level. It's just where it's... where it is precisely now, there's a bit of uncertainty. So, and that's, I guess, where I'm going with the figure of the average current house value in Dunedin City was $495,487 in 2020, which the number that you had been quoted in the Otago Daily Times in May said we were now at 621. That would be quite a jump. Yes, and I didn't have the precise figure in my head, but when I went to look for it, I'm sure that's the one I would have found. That sounds about right to me. Okay, thank you. So when we look at the figure on the previous page, where figure 23, where we start looking at our annual earnings growth, I guess when we start looking at those two and then look at housing affordability, it is getting quite severe in Dunedin. Yeah, it is. I mean, the increase in house prices over the past year has massively outstripped the increase in earnings. So affordability has deteriorated, and that's not just in Dunedin, that's across New Zealand, and regional New Zealand in particular is where the most dramatic deterioration's happened over the past year, off a lower base though. Yeah, so I remember last year's report about this time we received it, or it might have been in August by the time we got to it, was Christchurch average income was about $59,000 and house prices were at $500,000, and Dunedin's, $550,000, and Dunedin's income was $52,000 to $500,000. So income has relatively increased slightly across the two cities, but our housing affordability has probably gone up severely compared to Christchurch. Would that be a fair estimate? Yeah, a year ago Christchurch's housing market was really evenly balanced, primarily because they'd had such a dramatic supply response in the wake of the earthquakes. It's my understanding that there has been some limited deterioration to housing affordability in Christchurch, but nothing like to the same scale as what's happened across the rest of the country, or in Dunedin for that matter. So Dunedin has become relatively more unaffordable compared to Christchurch. And do you see that being one of the biggest factors for employers going forward and trying to, we've got an economy that is really growing and has a lot of opportunity, but housing affordability is going to be one of our biggest handicaps, or the handicap? Housing affordability, it's a challenge that a lot of employers in many other places are facing as well, so it's not unique to Dunedin. What I would say is that the relative starting point is not as bad as some of the big cities, and so part of the reason why people are coming to Dunedin from those other places is they're relatively even more unaffordable.
And so I take it then the other side of wages in Dunedin will have to go up to attract some of these people as well on that basis, because to offset where Dunedin's always been seen or as a low wage city.
Yeah, and I just turned to point 14 in the report, which was using some of these payroll tax filings. Yep. And what they showed was that wages in the March 21 year had risen despite the pandemic to just over 59,000, while they were a touch under 58,000 the year previously. And when you look at the exact trajectory of wages, there were actually declines in wages in the June and September quarters, and then they began to rise again thereafter as conditions normalised in the economy.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Just going on the housing, as it's a theme, I just looked at the quarterly economic monitor, Dunedin City Infometrics, and it says house values are up 13.6% to now 636,000. And that compares relatively across New Zealand. But the house sales is something that is really interesting on that, and that is house sales, Dunedin City -7% compared to Otago region 1.4 and New Zealand up 13.4. Can you comment around that -7%? Is that about a lack of supply? What does that mean?
I couldn't comment specifically for Dunedin at this for that data set, though I do note a lot of reports recently that the stock of housing available for sale has been quite low.
Yeah, no, thank you.
We seem to have come to the end of questions. Is someone happy to move? Moved Councillor Raddick, seconded Councillor Wiley. Councillor Raddick, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I'd like to thank Benji for the excellent report and his excellent discourse as he explained the various elements of it. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just a couple of things that I want to comment on, and I note in the report, which is very interesting, and thank you to Benji for his explanation of a lot of the figures in here. There's an awful lot to digest, but migration is extremely important for our city's growth, and it's going to continue to be. But one of the factors in that did not come out, but I want to draw attention to it, and that is maybe it was in the past training, we were very aware that as, for example, our university was recruiting staff, livability of the city was extremely important to the folk applying for jobs. And one of the items mentioned as an example of livability was the ability for their children to be able to cycle to school safely. So the items that both the Mayor and Councillor Benson Pope mentioned in the last debate are really important, and it's a fact that they can be obstacles, if not addressed, to getting the right people here. And as part of a compelling destination. The other point I want to make is the importance of the tertiary sector we see in these figures, and it's making a significant contribution to the economy of our city. And so being able to hire the right people in that tertiary sector are really important. But also what else brings them here and the difficulties they have, and housing affordability is obviously going to the future be extremely important. But it's one of the factors that we don't have a large amount of influence on that I want to mention, and I mentioned in the last debate, which is immigration. And in this morning's reports on national radio, we heard from, I believe it was a GP, in another part of the country, but the argument is still relevant, who had been brought here for her specialist skills, and it's important, where hospital, you can see, and the data is right up there in terms of it's important. And she was having trouble getting housing, but also difficulties around her family being able to get a working visa. We've got skilled migrants whose families can't even join them in New Zealand, and until we get those issues sorted, that's going to be an issue for us, be it hiring in our tertiary sector or hiring at our hospital, both of which contribute massively to our economy. So those are things to keep in mind. But on the whole, this gives us a very detailed and helpful picture of the way going forward for our city.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Benji, for this report. I always love reading data. It's very interesting. And the questions around migration and how that might look like were really interesting. There is a lot of regional shift from places that are even less affordable than Dunedin to Dunedin. Dunedin is an amazing city for livability. There is so much to offer here. But that speaks to some of our strategies and looking at our spatial plan and how we deal with the housing issue needs to be something that's forefront in our minds. I think we are looking at that and we're being proactive, but we need to continue to do so. Certainly the numbers employed by the tertiary and the house sector are really good to look at, and also the growth in startups and new businesses. But one of the interesting points on this is the tourism statistic, which, while I don't know what's happening there, will be interesting to unpick a bit more. And so I commend economic development for looking at renewing and reviewing the tourism strategy, because I think we're in a different place right now, and looking forward to the work that's going to be done on that.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, once again, Māori and women are low in the statistics for doing well, for, bouncing back from perhaps an economic downturn. And often women are probably, maybe it's choice, sometimes it's forced to be in this situation, but I can only guess because we haven't got a lot of the statistics, but given I'm a mother myself, I would say that a lot of the time, and I also did my master's degree looking at job sharing options and the skills that we were losing by a lot of women having to leave the profession when they have their children, because statistically a lot more of the jobs that are available are full-time rather than part-time. And so what we see here is that some of the women have had to take just, lower perhaps skilled jobs, and that you see that again and again. And I really urge us as a city, I'd be so proud to say, well, we're a city that is open to flexible working environments, open to help families, particularly women, to get forward. Because what is happening is that we do lose quite a lot of the skills, and women don't always want to, but give up their jobs as a profession, job, because a lot of those jobs are full-time. And they want to be part-time to be more flexible for the children. So I think that's where we've got the opportunity as a city that is more remote, we're further south. A lot of those jobs are in Wellington or Auckland. But to look at a city where we can tap into the fact that people are now working from the internet. They're Zooming, they're doing video Skypes. Women can seize that opportunity, and I think as a city we could urge them and encourage them to do more of that. Why can't we, market to overseas and tap into some of those job opportunities with our people here, our skills, particularly talented women who have professional careers prior to having children, who still have heaps of skills and knowledge, and use that as something to export from Dunedin, because we are a highly educated city, it's shown in our statistics, and a lot of those, I believe, will be women, but unfortunately some of those skills and abilities get lost, and it's not demeaning anything about having children. Having a child is one of the best things you'll ever do in your life, but it just empowers them to be able to use your skills and abilities in your academic profession as well. Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Chair. Most of this report, all the figures going into it are the financial year ending in March 2020, so they only have 1 week of the COVID lockdown in them. And I guess I would say that economists predicting the recession from a pandemic had always predicted before this one came along that it would be deep and V-shaped, go down very much, come but up very much again the same way. And so, because the underlying reasons are not an economic one, they're a health one. So I would predict that when we get next year's report, we're going to see the 2021 financial year look pretty much like a flat line. And that, in effect, meant that most companies, most people in the economy got shunted a year backwards. And then they've come back forward again. And you can see that in the comparative data and the wages and the employment from March to March. I would say, generally speaking, when you look at the figures in this report and in the previous report, Dunedin had traditionally, coming into the early 2000s, up to 2010, been underperforming compared to the rest of the country. And we have now effectively caught up, and we are pretty much close to average, which is fine, in my opinion. To have got to the point of being like any other major centre is actually a perfectly good outcome. And what was bad for us, what was performing really poorly for us, was how underperforming we had been. And some of the components of attractiveness for people coming in during those, because of those underperforming years, are also starting to go away now. So our houses were once cheap compared to the rest of the country, but now they are no longer cheap compared to the rest of the country. However, it's not such a bad thing, because what you're trading for is that you're getting vibrancy. A city that is turning over, is a much stronger economy, there's much more going on in it. That in itself is an attractive event. So I think we can still maintain ourselves as an attractive place to come and do business. Generally speaking, I think it's also fair to say, especially for New Zealand, it has been, that migration is one of the biggest, strongest drivers of GDP. So net inward migration is a good indicator that, and probably ranks quite closely to our increased GDP, and therefore I would say, as has been already mentioned earlier on, one of the strongest drivers to a strong economy is livability. And therefore we need to be considering not just the traditional drivers for the economy, but also the other things that make people want to stay. And by putting everything in a complete package, you get the outcome that we're looking for. I'm happy to say that this is pretty much as I think most of us have expected, with the city seeing strong, sustained growth for the last partial decade, last 7 or 8 years. I'm pretty sure that we have come through the pandemic better than other places, certainly other parts of the world. And then I think we're now probably looking forward into the future to pick up that growth that we have been seeing in the past. Thank you.
Councillor Raddick, your right of reply.
Yes, I certainly take Councillor O'Malley's point that we are now getting back to an even situation as far as the rest of the country goes, but only in terms of change. So, for instance, our average GDP growth has been consistently behind the rest of New Zealand over the last decade or even 2 decades. And similarly, our employment growth has been behind the rest of New Zealand consistently year on year for the last 2 decades. And so the net result of that is that we are now, whilst our percentage growth has caught up and we are now about the same as the others, we are currently lagging 19% behind in productivity and 10% behind in mean earnings. In other words, we've got a fair way to go to catch up. So I'm very gratified that we have the Grow Dunedin partnership putting in a sterling effort, and we have now engaged with the business end of the community to develop a new set of strategies to go with that. So I am very encouraged that things will improve as we go forward.
I'll put it. All in favour? Against? That's carried. That brings us to item 10 on our agenda, the Enterprise Dunedin Activity Report, and I'll welcome Fraser Liggett and Malcolm Anderson. Just as they're coming to the table, all of us would have received an email from Councillor Barker with a large number of questions related to our papers today, and in particular the activity report. I've passed that to staff, and they will work on the replies to those questions and send them out over the next few days. Gentlemen, do you wish to speak to it or just take questions?
I think we're happy to take questions. Thank you.
Questions, councillors. Councillor Gary.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I've got a few of them, some quite small. Page 97. Can you tell me what grips are? I'm sorry, I don't know that term in terms of the film industry. It's around filming. Grips, camera location and production accounting.
Sorry, Councillor, can you just repeat that?
Grips.
Grips.
No, sorry, item 17, top of the page on page 97. Okay, thank you for that. 4C, do we have any indication of the, it's on page 95, the recruitment process and the progress on that, Mr. Liggett?
We have commenced that process, so a recruitment agency has been identified, and we expect the advertising for that actually just commence this week. It'll probably be open for the next few weeks, and that'll be recommendations that we brought back to Council.
Thank you. And 31, which is on top of page 99, can you just remind me, it's my, see if my memory's right, Mr. Anderson, were we the first council or one of the first to have a destination plan in New Zealand?
That's my understanding. I wasn't here at the time, but it's my understanding.
That we were the first, yep. Large number of questions. 45A, do the figures that are the high number of hits to the website correspond, and forgive me if this was here and I missed it, do they correspond to the Plan D campaign?
Yeah, we have a piece of research called Tourism Sentiment Index, and we can clearly see where the conversations and people's engagement relates to our initiatives around Plan D.
Great. And finally, item 55, page 101, the collaboration on Tertiary Open Day. Is that the first time we've done that, or is that something we regularly do?
No, we've been completed it for a number of years. Fraser might want to comment.
Thank you.
I think you covered it well, Mr. Anderson.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I just had a question. I see in point 62 there's talk about working with Travel New Zealand to support the promotion of Dunedin to Australia travel, and I'm just wondering if there's any idea when flights will resume, if at all, from Dunedin direct across the Tasman.
I think that's really a question for Dunedin Airport, but essentially we're working with them once we understand what that opportunity is to help market that opportunity for the city.
Is there any indication though whether we will see them again, or is it really numbers dependent, whether it's a payable service?
That's a commercial decision that Air New Zealand and the airport would have to make together, I would imagine.
Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Paragraph 63 around trends. Wondering what the vibe of that was and how were our Dunedin operators received?
The vibe was very positive. Obviously the first big opportunity for the sector to get together since March last year. And Dunedin operators were very vocal and engaged really well with the opportunities around trends.
Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. Probably the first one, probably for Mr. Deaker, around number 18 and the indication that there's currently 9 major projects of inquiries in the pipeline. Just wondering, Mr. Deaker, just how strong are those leads out of those 9? Are you speak to some of them?
I just reviewed that this morning, and we now have 7 in the pipeline. 2 have fallen off, and of those 7, I would say 3 are very solid.
Great. Awesome, thank you. And thanks for your work in that sphere. And on, this is not for you, unless you're into basketball. Item 53 around the sponsorship we do, Enterprise Dunedin, with the Otago Nuggets. Forgive me as well, I had to look up what that was, and it was basketball. What's your feeling around that one? Because it just suggests that our branding is on our warm-up strips. So what's the cost, and what's the feedback from that? What's your sense of how valuable that is?
So in general terms, we often support sporting groups. We have done over many years in a small way. This initiative was around $10,000, and the opportunity for us is live television, both in New Zealand, Australia and United States. It's keeping our brand alive. Essentially, that's the key outcome that we sought from this.
I understand that. I'm just curious to... excuse my ignorance here, because I'm actually into sport, but is coverage of the Otago Nuggets fairly strong in North America?
I'll jump in as well, if I can.
Sorry.
There are some broader community benefits as well to supporting basketball, because it reaches a different demographic than some of the other areas that we support. And we did what we could to the current national champions. We did what we could to secure their ongoing viability in Dunedin, and the quid pro quo was we got to brand the kit.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Just a question about the eyesight visitation on paragraph 66. In the table, there's a pretty remarkable increase in the Aucklanders visiting. Is that just the effect of the, or is it possible to separate the effect of the Plan D campaign, reported later, which appears to run over that period, or is that also something to do with university graduations and the like, and a large number of families here paying for accommodation and visiting while they're here? Can you make any useful comment about that?
Unfortunately, we don't manage to gather the real reasons why they're here always, but there are graduations and more people coming down, but just the fact that Aucklanders are having to holiday in New Zealand, and big numbers coming down to Dunedin, we're seen as a...
But the Plan D campaign would have...
Well, that would have influenced us as well,
right,
yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Wiley. Councillor Elder.
Thank you. PR and promotions, and I note we have been successful in getting coverage across a lot of media, and do you think that's more than other places, and what would you attribute that to?
Very hard to answer that question. I don't have data across the other regional tourism organisations. Anecdotally, I'd say we've done very well.
It's been moved by Councillor Wiley, seconded by Councillor Gary. Speakers. Councillor Wiley?
Yeah, thank you. I think the report really sums up very nicely the amount of work that is being undertaken in so many diverse roles, and shows what is happening around the city, whether it's the Centre of Digital Excellence, film, skills, talent, business vitality and tourism. You know, it's been such a challenging year for the last 15 months, and I think when we see the work that the team is putting together and the engagements they're having, I think it's really, really positive. for Councillor Walker's benefit, basketball is actually the fastest growing sport in New Zealand over the last 5 years. Very large in high school, so I can see a lot of benefits for our Polytech and university. And they're a very strong team in that sense. But the other part feature is that actually the signage is actually at half court. So anytime you turn it on and watch the TV, you'll see them. So it's not just on the uniforms. So I think it's for $10,000, the mileage we're getting for that is a very strong bang for its buck. But no, overall, very good report. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to comment on some specifics. I want to start with item number 7, which is around the Memorandum of Understanding with JP Games, and I congratulate, first of all, start by congratulating the ED team for the significant contribution that all of their efforts have made to Dunedin's economy. This is a piece of work relating to code. It was back in 2019, and now it's coming to fruition. And this is about Holly Robinson, a Paralympian, was announced as a character in that particular set of games. And I recall when JP Games came to Dunedin, and it was a very significant delegation and time. So great to see that happening. Item 24, which was around Outside the Valley, a film about entrepreneurship, and it included Dunedin. And talked about the remarkable entrepreneurs in the city and the work they're doing, and it featured 3 of them, and it was a point of real pride, and Enterprise Dunedin's work in relation to that was noted. On page 99, we are looking at a refresh of the destination plan, and I just remind us that we were ahead of our time in that regard, and as we've just heard, the first in the country to have a destination plan. The success of Plan D is very evident, and I note the figure in item 56 that we are in the top 30% of global tourism sentiment index scores, which is quite remarkable. And I've certainly met people who loved the campaign, were inspired to come here, and I particularly loved the recent one of anything but dark, anything but dreary, and so forth. And if you haven't seen it, it's just fantastic. We can't underestimate the importance of film to this city and all of the potential that that has. Page 57 talks about the TV NZ, the TV ads as part of Tourism New Zealand's program, and I just saw the other night on TV1, perhaps some of the rest of you saw it, the Midwinter Festival featured in one of those ads. On Saturday night at ID Fashion, the Viva magazine was given to every one of the 350 people attending ID Fashion, and in it was a fantastic article about the godmothers of fashion in Dunedin, and featured a great number of things about city life, again that livability aspect. So this is a really positive support. It speaks to all of the initiatives, many of the initiatives happening that are now starting to reap rewards for our city and will continue to in the future. I congratulate the ED team and thank them all for the efforts they have made to date.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, I think $10,000 to sponsor the basketball Otago Nuggets is cheap as chips, and it gives you great value for dollar because they are covered, you know, all the time on TV, and every time we get that exposure, it gives Dunedin and Otago that coverage, so it's brilliant. The other day, I was scrolling through social media and saw this brilliant piece on the Good Morning show. I think it was either in Melbourne or in Sydney, but promoting Dunedin again. And a lot of the visuals came from that Plan D. They looked like they did. And once again, I know I've said it before, but I think that Plan D was brilliant. So clever. And you see the images pop up everywhere, and it's just a brilliant marketing campaign, in my opinion. I think it sold us as, you know, the poor cousin, but look what we've got to offer. And the photos said it all. They were beautiful. And like, we have a family WhatsApp chat group, and someone posted the picture of Tunnels Beach that came off the Plan D, and our this is my immediate family, we're all going, well, that looks like, because we've travelled a lot, like, you know, it looks like this place overseas, looks like that, and it's here in Dunedin. We are a fabulous city, we have so much to offer. And I go back to what I said earlier in the thing, I would love to see us as a city, because we have given money and funds and encouraged, you know, different groups, and I'd love to see us focus on targeting women, because I really feel that women, particularly women with children, want to do more with their careers and need more flexibility around it, particularly not just the school holidays, but around that 3 to 6 p.m. each day, weekdays. As a working mum, I fully support them, and I can see an opportunity as a city for us to market that and look at the pickup we could get as marketing ourselves as a family-friendly city who offers flexible work environments and encourages it and markets our talent, and women with really good academic and skills and professional skills are something really marketable, and I'd love to see us pick that up. Thank you.
Councillor Raddick.
Well, we're well aware that Dunedin is a beautiful city with outstanding scenic and built environments. So I would just simply like to congratulate the team, the ED team, for their very strong emphasis throughout recent years on the visual imagery that they're using through a whole range of campaigns and throughout, well, pretty much everything they do, in particular the Plan D for Dunedin. But I think that strong use of visual imagery has made a significant difference to the uplift in recognition and increase in visitors to Dunedin. Well done.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm intrigued by is the numbers, and we look at the second round of code grants, 28 expressions of interests. This builds on 56 EOIs received in the first round, with 7 contracted projects and the creation of 5 new studios in Dunedin. Those numbers are impressive. Startup ecosystem, 22 inquiries for the new founders, bringing to the date the total of 184. Delivery of 3 cohorts of Audacious during the period, with 85 new ventures accepted into the program. 5 applications received through the distiller incubation. Then the inquiries around film. There is a lot of vibrancy and a lot of energy and a positive energy in Dunedin right now, and it is showing in the number of people turning up with new ideas and new ventures, and that makes Dunedin a really exciting place. And I have to agree with Jules when it comes to our destination Plan D. The visuals of how beautiful Dunedin is just telling our story to the world. And in fact, under TripAdvisor, we are now one of the 12 top destinations, future destinations to go to, which means it's actually having its impact, not just New Zealand-wide, but worldwide. So I just want to say I'm really excited about this report, the numbers, and the outcomes and outputs speak for themselves. So thank you for all the hard work you've done, and may we continue.
Councillor Wiley, your right of reply.
Thank you. Yeah, as the ad goes, Dunedin is anything but dull. It's always nice when you hop on the New Zealand flight and look through, there's Dunedin on the title of a cover in the Kiora magazine, and the other great work, as others have mentioned. But I think the other thing is, it was touched on the social media videos, the marketing that goes on in that area. But the other part that I really enjoyed watching late last week was when we saw that beautiful Dunedin as referenced by mind blank, okay, on Australia Channel 9 morning show last week. So you know what? It is beautiful, Dunedin, and we are anything but dull.
I'll put it. All in favour? Against? That's carried. Councillors, I'm in your hands. Would you like a 10-minute recess or carry on? Carry on. A 5-minute break. All right. I'll move that we take a 5-minute recess, or just over, back here at 3:05. All in favour? Against? Councillor Wiley seconded. the table. It is welcome. Do you wish to speak or to the papers, or just go straight to questions?
No, we'll just go straight to questions, please.
Questions, councillors. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Reid, could you speak to the current situation with international education in the secondary sector?
Currently, the secondary sector is probably experiencing the biggest lack of understanding about the government's future direction for that industry. That is probably where the biggest number of students per percentage have left New Zealand, obviously because they're under 18 and it's difficult to be away from your family for that length of time. We're still waiting for quite a few new policy settings and immigration settings, so we're not sure where that sector is likely to be by the end of this year.
Thank you for that fulsome answer. And my second question is around Education New Zealand, and I understand from what you've just told me that they're a Crown agency, of course, and can't lobby the government, but how important is that immigration element, and is advocacy happening around the importance of that? Because we certainly heard, and Mr McGowan will be aware of this, when we met with ambassadors and High Commissioners, around students waiting to come, ready and waiting to come.
Yes, the advocacy is going to be very, very important going forward. Both with the Ministry of Education, more than Education New Zealand. So they have an international division that looks at all the policy settings for education and including international education. And they will be working with Immigration New Zealand. And we are still waiting for new policy settings and immigration settings to come, and they are expected hopefully in July. The policy settings from the Ministry of Education are likely to be a little bit longer in coming. They're looking to do there's a recovery strategy that exists, but that was done in July 2020, but that's not fit for purpose anymore, so there'll be work with the Minister and the Ministry to put 2.0 out, and they're hoping that'll happen in July.
So on those policy settings that you were expecting, does the sector have any heads up on where that's going to go, where that's going to land?
The only one that we are aware of that we know that they're looking at is the study to work policy settings for immigration, and we have been told that they will change. We're just not sure in what way.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. What do you see, it might be hard to answer this, so if you can't, that's fine. If we don't get the secondary students come back in, what's the impact that could have on our city?
So currently, of the 12 high schools, only 9 of them still have international students studying in there, and at the end of this year, and under the current settings, at least half of those students who remain are at year 13 and will make decisions about leaving school. That's undeniable. What we're not sure of is which students who maybe at year 12 are younger will decide that they need to go home after 2 years away from home and family. So really unclear at this stage, but generally across the country, the secondary numbers at the end of this year will be very, very low.
Thank you. And is there an urgent need for skilled and unskilled migrants to come in for business? Is that, or maybe that's better under another paper perhaps? Yes, sorry, I'll ask that later. Save that one, Dougal.
Councillor Elder.
Just thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. For students who have been caught in COVID-19, they have not. Many have not been able to go home. They're too scared to go home because, in fact, they feel like they won't be able to come back for education. And you've got here some support systems for those people around those very things. And I was just wondering, have you had any feedback from the people using those support systems, how they've been for them?
I'm sorry, Councillor, specifically, are you referring to
The gatherings and
the
the support systems around the students, because in fact it's a very stressful time for them.
Yes, we've had positive feedback that it helps when the students have an opportunity to get together as a group. Often they feel quite siloed in their own high schools, so their ability to spend time together is very valuable for them. And as the group grows smaller, they all know each other quite well, so our ability to facilitate them spending time together has been well received.
Oh, cool, because it's been very, very stressful for those young people. Study Dunedin is working with Education New Zealand to secure funding on a future focused project. So can you tell us just a little bit more about that project?
Sure. What Education New Zealand have indicated that they are interested in 3 things going forward. That's student experience, social licence, and I'm going to forget the third one, it'll come back to me. So, long-term retention, which is in fact what we've applied for funding in. So what we're looking at is how we can, when the students actually come back on shore, how we can better quantify the pathway between high school and tertiary study and then on to work, if that's going to be possible in the future. So that's involving actually a product pathway opportunity that we're focusing on, to hope that we'll attract students from offshore into high school and they'll see a pathway into tertiary study from there and into work.
Thank you, thank you. That sounds exciting.
Councillor Raddick.
Thank you. Has Study Dunedin discussed with Education New Zealand the possibility of vaccinated or immune students coming to Dunedin next year?
That has been part of discussions that we've had. Education New Zealand, as a Crown agency, they can't make policy decisions in that space, so it wouldn't be up to them. So any conversations we had in that space have been around whether it might be possible for existing students to be able to go home if they were vaccinated and then be able to come back on shore after Christmas break.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Are there any concerns for accommodation for students for next year? Because I've heard, I don't know whether it's correct, but I've heard figures around more than 900 extra students this year for next year coming in. And is that what you're hearing, that we've got an increased number of students coming into the tertiary market?
I couldn't speak for you'll be talking about the domestic market.
You're only talking about international, right? Okay, yes. Thank you.
There's no other speakers. Oh, Councillor Elder.
You're talking about the Ministry of Education and the government looking at new policy settings and immigration settings. How much engagement have they had with the local sector, do you feel?
Through Study Dunedin, we have been having conversations with the Ministry directly through a network of, so there are positions like mine around the country, and as a group we have had conversations with the Ministry International team, and we will continue to do so. We haven't had direct conversations with that regard yet, but we are hoping to before the new recovery strategy is launched in July.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Happy to move.
Well, seconded Councillor Wiley. No other questions? In that case, debate. Councillors. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. We're reminded in this report that the latest reports from the University of Otago and Otago Polytechnic indicate that this tertiary sector contributes over $1.5 billion to the Dunedin economy. So it is an extremely important part and sector of our economy. And sometimes the things that get lost in that, but we certainly haven't forgotten them, is the importance of looking after our international students as part of that, and supporting them in a variety of ways. And that's been a particularly challenging thing to do over the last year. So I want to start by acknowledging Ms Reid and her colleagues in the wider city for their work around repatriation of students last year. And I know I've mentioned it before, but I noted in my conversations with various ambassadors and high commissioners that they talked about their role and about the appreciation of the way that students were looked after and how important there was. So I want to note that. And I want to also note the initiatives happening in this city to look after the students we have at a difficult time when they're homesick, missing their families, been away for a long time, and contemplating what they will do next. This is all part of the pastoral care. The work on the Tertiary Open Day to connect with families and students, and the students who flew down from, I think it was Auckland, possibly from elsewhere, to attend that and to support them and encourage them to stay here is pivotal going forward. But the most important thing that we can do as a council, I believe, is to lobby government around the state of immigration and the challenges that immigration are providing and the obstacles. We know that there's some policy, we're waiting some policy settings from Ministry of Education and Immigration, but I have said this before, that we lack an immigration office, and in a city that has such an important education sector and such a large number in pre-COVID times 5,000 international students, and also a settlement for refugees, it is extraordinary to me that we do not even have a pop-up immigration office. Many of the kinds of issues that are required are much more complicated than being trying to deal with it on a telephone call and with inconsistent information and different immigration officers every time you call. So in this very uncertain time, immigration-wise, for our students, and we certainly heard from those ambassadors and high commissioners around those difficulties for students, I believe this council needs to continue to talk with local MPs and lobby for some clear direction and support in this regard, so that we have a clear pathway going forward in our international education sector.
Councillor Elder.
Well, one thing for sure is this sector is changing, and changing quite dramatically. And it was encouraging to hear that local education providers have had input into policy settings and immigration settings. And I would encourage the government to continue those conversations, because in fact, in the education sector, this contributes a great deal. I want to commend also Study Dunedin on the support around students who actually were compelled to stay here, because if they went home, they would not be quite likely be able to come back. And that was a huge issue. Homesickness and lack of contact with family and with each other was actually creating a lot of stress. And so I commend the group that goes across all the high schools, that they meet regularly, because in fact they have similar issues and they can talk about them, which is fantastic. I also commend the work that is being looked at for future focus project, in the sense of pathways, because in fact the students who do come here actually look to the whole world as to where they want to go next in the next stage of their study. And what better opportunity than for us to look at having pathways for them here in New Zealand and encouraging those. So I commend the work that's been done in supporting those students who have gone through a really hard time, and also the idea of a future focus program which actually helps them stay here.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I've been at the receiving end of international students staying in our home. As children, we grew up regularly having American students and Japanese students, students from all over the world who stayed with us. At one point, I think our house was the one stay for all the students training to be teachers from Iowa University, and we got to know a lot of those people really well. And as a follow-up, I went over to Japan and stayed with one of our students later in life, and it's built long, really good relationships with international people that we now, and whenever there is, and I say to my children, and I said to actually some of the ambassadors that I was sitting beside the other day, is that I think one of the best things we could do for world peace is have everyone, have an international student in their home. And they were talking about how they'd lived in other places and had, got to know that community and that family. And what it does, it builds strong relationships. But when you look at a country, what you do, you remember, Sayaka from Japan, or, someone else from China, or someone from America, and you remember the close relationship you had with them and that they were part of your family for a while. And so those things are really important. And obviously right now we can't have international students as much as we used to, and I applaud the government for tightening our borders at a time when we needed it and keeping us safe. But once those things are able to be freed up, I think, I'd urge everyone to take an opportunity to have a homestay student, because it is really beneficial, and particularly for children, I think, to get to know different cultures. And one thing I've said to my children is that different doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's different, and they get to learn a lot about different cultures. So, thank you. And it's not just the students that are coming either. I just said it's the parents who come and look around here and they go, wow, what a great city. And of course they bring with that all their contacts, and there's an economic benefit to that. Apart from just the student staying here and spending, you do get an onflow from that. So, well worthwhile.
Councillor Gary, your right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I couldn't agree more with colleagues that have spoken, but we need to continue to put resources into supporting the students that are here. And clearly the 99 countries previously represented and the 5,000 students that we had here added a great richness to our city. And although the numbers are unlikely to return in the immediate future to those kinds of numbers, they will return to more than we have now at some point in the future. And Councillor Houlihan is right. It is the formation of the global citizen and that international understanding that comes from this, and I don't think that can be underrated. And she's right that the economic benefits extend to the families visiting. Whole families, friends, coming out to visit the students while they're here, even if they're here for only one semester. Pathways from study to employment have been mentioned, and that was certainly something touched on in questions from the ambassadors. And so clearly international education is going to continue to be important to this city's future, and we are going to need to continue to lobby government to assist us so that we can get our students back.
I'll put it. All in favour? Against? That's carried. On to item 12, Strategic Tourism Assets Protection Program update. Welcome, Malcolm and Louise. Do you wish to say anything before questions, or just go to questions? Questions, councillors? Seems there are none. Councillor Wiley, you have a question?
Very briefly, just thanks for the report. Like all the reports today, excellent. Just around number 44, the community sentiment and the Angus and Associates resident sentiment report. It seems quite an interesting one. Is there any chance we can either see that, or you can just speak briefly to what the essence of that contained?
Sure, happy to share that, and we'll be doing so very soon with the operators as well.
Councillor Raddick.
A hard question. Which of these projects excites you the most?
At a personal level, which is a response to your question, there's two actually, if I can claim two. One is the cultural piece we're doing with Kaha around looking at our marketing and where our brand might go in the future. And secondly, it's around the pathways towards carbon neutrality. I think as an industry, it's an opportunity, and we're really keen to see the sector move in that space.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. How would you say that our tourism operators in our city are faring? And I'd say post-COVID, but like Councillor Gary said earlier, it's not, we're not post-COVID, obviously, but...
It varies on the type of tourism operation. So some are doing okay, not great, but okay, and some are not doing well at all. And we know there's some more probably going to fall over in the next few months.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. These 15 STAT projects, which are really exciting, I just wondered whether, and it might be a question for Mr. Christie actually, has that funding allowed ED to proceed with projects that we just haven't had the resources before? Were these always part of the plan, but we just haven't had the resources to be able to embark upon them?
I think in answer to that question, it's enabled us to move faster on some projects, and it's also enabled us to undertake additional pieces of work. So both have been beneficial, and we are grateful to the government for this funding to allow us to support the sector in a tough time. Okay, thank you.
For you, both of you perhaps, that social licence, and I saw some time ago, a couple of years ago, a very similar survey from Angus and Associates around social licence. What are you anticipating will have changed pre-COVID, and and where we are at now?
So if we look at the response from the 500 people that were surveyed, it falls into kind of two camps. A number of residents are supportive of tourism for obvious reasons, business benefits, growth in the economy. A number aren't supportive in terms of overcrowding, parking, and other issues like that. There's nothing untoward in the comments or the results that we've seen that would surprise us, I guess.
And was the environment, or the effect on the environment and wildlife, in amongst those responses?
It was, but it wasn't one of the top responses.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor van der Vis.
Thank you. On page 113, under item 30, it says that the first stage of this project was a webinar for tourism operators with consultants to outline the importance of measurement reduction and offsetting carbon. And then in 31 it says that they presented to encourage tourism operators to utilise the carbon measurement tool and work towards carbon neutrality. Is it not the case that tourism and carbon neutrality are very strange bedfellows, given tourism is a major cause and carbon neutrality an attempt to stifle that cause?
I guess the response would be that we acknowledge some of that, and that the tourism industry as a sector is very keen to seize the opportunity to change perceptions and actually make a difference in the carbon space.
So, in your experience then, were a number of these operators very keen to start using the carbon measurement tool and work towards carbon neutrality?
Yeah, it's going to be a slow process, but we have one operator, for example, that is completely carbon-free, and there are others that are currently considering working with us in the next stage of the program.
What percentage of the operators do you think were interested in going down this particular road?
That will come, I will be able to quantify that answer shortly, but in general I would say 10 to 20 of the operators.
What percentage would that be?
So, for example, we have nearly 50 qual-marked operators, and we probably work with about 150 overall. So at the moment it's a small percentage, but this is a big step.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
They've almost all been asked by Councillor Vandervis actually, and it really just gets to what was the level of engagement with the operators in that carbon neutral activity, and then I guess you're going to be writing a report because it finishes next week. What's the follow-up going to be?
So the follow-up will be ourselves working with basically a group of what we're going to term as champions to really try and make a difference in the space and to show others that it is possible to do. And I guess that a wider breadth of the program is we're also looking to see how visitors can contribute to carbon neutrality within Dunedin. In other words, when they come back, what can they do towards contributing to that? I think the example in New Zealand is the Nelson EDA, Economic Development Agency. They've now developed a program with about 30 operators, I think at last count, and you can actually do an itinerary around Nelson that's completely carbon neutral. And in fact, the EDA in Nelson is contributing to people who choose those carbon-free itineraries by paying a small fee, I guess, for their travel into the region.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I've been tapping on some of these virtual tours you can do of, museums and galleries and things like that around the world, and a lot of that innovation came through COVID. Is that obviously for the tour, but a lot of those now are charging, so they're making, they're trying to get some money out of it as well, which is fair enough. How many of our operators are sort of looking at things like that, or is that something that's being considered?
There are 2 operators that I know of that work in the international space from Dunedin doing that piece of work, and I think as the next one of the further projects from STAP is the looking at product development, and that's certainly on our agenda to discuss with operators and other stakeholders about what that might look like.
Yes, because that's what I was going to say. My next step would be some of them might not know how to do it. So are we able to support operators who want to do that to achieve those, perhaps set that up, because it has...
Yeah, essentially that's one of the outcomes we hope will come out of the product development work. And I acknowledge there's a company in Palmerston North that does farm tours, virtual farm tours, and they've been extremely successful.
Because visually, would you say there'd be a benefit to Dunedin, Otipoti Dunedin, for something like that could go out to the world and it sends our wonderful images, particularly if they're anything like the Plan D, the images were amazing.
It's certainly an opportunity, although tourism and travellers love to engage with people.
That's right, thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you. I just want to follow up one last thing about the carbon neutrality. Are you getting support from the policy team or whoever's doing our carbon neutral 2030 to quantify the impacts on that?
Yeah, so we talked to them at the beginning of the process, and effectively we are, I guess, using the tourism sector as a bit of a opportunity to see how other businesses engage across Dunedin City.
If we're going to be able to quantify the actual carbon reduction as it moves towards our targets.
For those that go through the whole program, definitely.
Councillor Elder.
I've got a few questions. The rewrite of the Dunedin destination plan, and good that it's happening. How's that progressing, and what's the feedback on the consultations so far?
So the Stafford Strategy, who are the consultants, are working through the feedback that's both been received online and face-to-face, and they'll be coming back in July with an initial draft and kind of a statement of where we are. We anticipate that we should have this finished by November, but that will depend, as the report notes, on some national opportunities around transformation in the tourism sector.
Next question. You're doing an update of our digital imagery, and I suppose, are you looking at updating our web page and pages on the DCC sites?
So that's another project that sits outside STAT, but yes, we are looking at the website and where it might go in the future.
And related to that digital imagery, has some of that already been used in some of our imagery promoting Dunedin?
Yes, it certainly has, especially for the winter campaign, and it's freely available online through the brand kit process, so anyone can download it.
Oh, so where do they go for that?
Jump on our Dunedin website and there's a link to brand kit and where all our images are stored.
Oh, that's great. That's excellent. Signature event promotion, and there's funding in that round for large signature events. How are the applications going for that, and when do they close?
So no applications per se. That one we're tying in with the Regional Events Fund, which round 2 opens later in this year, and we will make a decision about where we can make a difference in terms of marketing boosts for any new or major large event that might come out of that process.
So people need to look out for it when?
Well, the Regional Event Fund opens in October, I believe.
October. Yeah. And I was just wondering, there has been a lot of funding go towards tourism and new product development, etc. And I was wondering what other, I suppose, pots of money is out there for the community to look at regarding that.
From a tourism point of view?
Yes, just from
there's the standard
product.
Government TIF funding, which is for infrastructure, toilets. Tunnel Beach is a good example. I'd be struggling to think of what it might be after that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Do you know what the carbon emissions are for our tourism sector?
I could be corrected, but I think it was in the Dunedin City Council report. Someone might want to correct me on that.
And what do you think that would be?
Oh, I have no idea, sorry.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you tell me why none of this funding was available to be applied to, or even more of it, to our Jolly Fine train?
Sure. If the train had qualified for the other STAT funding, which was also known as Strategic Tourism Asset Protection Program, that was based around operators. This funding is for regional tourism organisations to work in 3 spaces: destination management, marketing and product development.
And did the operator of the train apply, in your knowledge, for that funding?
I'm uncertain.
Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
Can someone get us an answer to that, please?
Certainly can. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Just related to reducing the carbon footprint of travel, and I note in a report in Nelson the product development of actually mountain biking and cycling in Nelson. They quoted that they reduced carbon and increased people staying in Nelson, and that has a positive impact locally. And I was just wondering about that whole idea that as locals we are tourists, and that reduces carbon footprint, and the development of local product for locals and spreading those stories of what locals can do here.
Yeah, again, I think that's an opportunity that might come through in the product development piece of work, which will start shortly.
And related to that is the whole idea of people in Otago region visiting the Otago region and the development of that? Is that part of that, and the domestic? Because all of those lower carbon footprint as well.
Yeah, in a broader context, we're working with 45 South and the Otago Cycle Trails Collective, so they all are looking to engage the broader Otago in those opportunities, and certainly for 45 South and the Southern Scenic Route, the advent of EVs and EV charging stations is a great opportunity.
Thank you.
Seems we have run out of questions. Do I have a mover? Moved Councillor Elder. I'm happy to second. Councillor Elder.
Well, I'm actually excited about the opportunities that the funding that the government has given us to develop our tourism has given us, and that's across a wide range of sectors. It's very exciting, and we can see already the input of the digital imagery having an effect around not only the world and New Zealand, but also I think the sense of pride Dunedin people have on their own locality. I'm really excited also about the review and the rewrite of the destination plan and the work that's going on there. I think the carbon neutrality, there are huge opportunities in that field, and hearing about nationwide rollout of EV charging stations throughout New Zealand will certainly help. So I believe that this is a big opportunity to pivot and relook at what we've got to offer and how we resource that. So well done.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to see this work, and I think it is appropriate that it's spent in this way in terms of allowing the local industry to respond to COVID. I was just going to answer Councillor Benson-Pope's question because it was raised in debate when the rail company came and spoke to us, and I asked them about STAP funding. They did apply for it, but they applied for it for hibernation, which was outside the remit of the STAP. Everybody who applied for it of the size of Dunedin Railways pretty much got the $500,000 if they were for continuing operations. And this is a good report.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Yes, I see, I've said this for years. I mean, I can remember years and years ago when there was the whole debate around GE, and I thought I was against us having genetically modified things in our, so I was in support of no GE. But I also think as a country we've got an opportunity that we could have gone fully organic because we're an island. But why I'm bringing this up is because we're talking about climate emissions, and that in connection to tourism. Now, in Europe and all around the world, people look at places like us, we're perceived as being green, and that perception, I'd like to think we could hold our head up high and say we are, and I think as a council we have been ambitious, but I think we can do way better. And as a tourism marketing point, I think it is a really good selling point, so I think it's great to see that on the list of things that we're looking at doing. And I also applaud the way we're doing that, is that in ED we've got staff who are clearly working with individual operators, and that to me says we're taking them on a journey with us. What has happened sometimes is happening now, I was going to say in the past, but it is happening now, is that things just happen and all of a sudden people go, oh, what's happening with our city? Why is this going on? People reject things if they're pushed on them, and I think when you take them on a journey and explain the benefits of things, a lot of people will join you on that journey and carry on, and that's what I don't think we've done well. So I applaud Malcolm and his team for bringing this up and working with individual operators around that, and then the others will see how well they went, and hopefully we'll get a lot of people pick that up, because I do think as an island and you know, that we could get a lot of tourism around that, especially if we can market the fact we're a carbon zero city or something like that, you know, which we have been ambitious in our goals with that. Thank you.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, I'd like to compliment the team on the report, but also in particular 2 of the initiatives that are contained within it, the 2 memoranda of understanding with our regional neighbours. So I think the 45 South initiative to get people moving between the areas, and also the Cycle Trail Collective to have a regionally linked up set of cycle trails. I think both of those are quite specific departures from what we typically focus on, just our own thing. So working in with our neighbours around the region will make a significant difference to how we all get ahead. Thank you.
Councillor Elder, your right of reply.
I think everything's been said. I just want to congratulate Malcolm and the team for all the hard work they're doing.
I'll put it. All in favour? Against? That's carried. Brings us on to item 13, Plan D marketing campaign. Welcome, Malcolm, or welcome back. You wish to say anything or go straight to questions?
Straight to questions, although I would like to say thanks very much to the team. It's been a very difficult process running a campaign through a pandemic, and they've done a great job.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I think they've done a great job too. However, can you sort of give some evidence of that? Because I believe they have, but is there some statistics to prove that that is the case? Well, yeah, I mean, okay, do you want me to pull out the page and the item? I was just... Great, so from page 120, could you please, thank you.
So visitor spend is a nationally recognised measure of how we measure success in these campaigns at a general level, and we managed to maintain most months and increase visitor spend compared to 2019 more recently. So in those terms, we've done really well. In terms of awareness, all our social media outperforms other regional tourism organisations, especially around Instagram and Facebook. For example, we're ahead in terms of engagement of Rotorua, Christchurch and Auckland and Facebook. Instagram, we're by far the biggest engagement rates across all the RTOs. And I guess the final opportunity or final result is the anecdotal, and I use that word carefully, comments from tourism operators that say people have come to their operation because of Plan D. They didn't know much about Dunedin, and that inspired them to come here.
That's what I was going to ask, have we got a mechanism where they go into operators or into businesses and asking them, where did you, why did you come to Dunedin?
Sure. No, that would be our one desire, that we had a system across the whole of Dunedin City. We don't. Some operators are really good and have some systems, and some don't. We can measure other campaigns. We've done one with Flight Centre recently, and that resulted in over 300 impressions. In other words, people looked at that campaign. But when it comes down to individual operators and linking it directly to a campaign, it's really a lack of information and data sources that makes it difficult.
So it's hard to track whether they've come here because of that campaign?
Yeah, in a perfect world, we'd have some artificial intelligence that linked up our campaigns to why they came. That's possible, but everybody needs to be on the same platform, and that's the challenge.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just trying to get my head around the numbers in point 23 and 24. 23 is the month ending April for 21, 20 and 19. And obviously you can see April 20 is what happens when you lock everybody up. So we've got there basically a restoration of the domestic spend back between the 2 years. And then we go to 24 where you've got the total visitor spend, and we're actually up between 2019 and 2021. Does that imply then that a lot of our spend is always domestic?
Certainly, historically, domestic's always been the higher percentage of spend.
Yeah, because if you then go to like 22 and you look at the percentage reduction, we went down 15 million, which is over 300, it's about 5%. And then the outwardly facing ones were down dramatically, but then the smaller regions that, like the Wairarapa, probably doesn't have a huge amount of international tourists, only went down about the same as much as us. So my point being, as we're getting into Plan D was in the end essentially was a domestic tourism market. Should we be actually considering that, given that it looks like a large number of our tourists are domestic anyway? Would that be maybe strategically what we should be thinking of in the future?
Just clarify your last part of the question.
Well, when we had international tourists, we weren't really attracting them anyway, and maybe we can't attract them based on the fact that my experience going to any country is you have a very tight itinerary and a very limited number of places you go to. So to get someone to deviate is quite hard. But we actually look like here that we've done quite successfully, given our annual spend in 2021 is actually higher than 2019. That maybe targeting domestic is in fact a strategic thing to do.
So I guess I'll answer that in two parts. Internationally, it was still around 30 or 30+% of our visitors spend in a normal year. So international visitors are really important. And secondly, it's an opportunity for Dunedin's brand from a wider perspective, not necessarily tourism. So it comes back to the discussions earlier around live, study. It's all part of growing that brand at an international level, which is really important to us.
Councillor Raddick.
Yeah, this is a pretty marvellous result to have our visitors spend higher as a result of COVID than in the two previous years. How sustainable do you think this is? Clearly we've got a big domestic result, a big domestic bump. Do you think we can keep them coming year on year?
My personal opinion would be that we can probably maintain our visitors' spend until such time as the visitor borders open, and then that will be more challenging.
Right. Okay, I think that'll cover it.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question around Plan D. Plan D was slightly risky and out there, but I think highly successful because of it. Could you talk to that a wee bit?
Yeah, so Plan D was originally conceived to be in the Australian market in February and March, and certainly in February it became apparent that we couldn't do that. The essence behind Plan D originally was to showcase Dunedin as being a place where you could get the same or similar experiences from anywhere in the world. We were prepared to take a risk. We knew that 31 other regional tourism organisations had funding and would be in the same market, and they've done a great job in terms of their marketing campaigns, but they have been average, I guess, from a marketing perspective, and that's been backed up by some of the comments that we've got around Plan D. So while they've done a great job, we've done an even better job, and to maintain that we need to continue to be different and take calculated risks.
So you would say being different actually enabled us to stand out?
Yes.
And what commentary and feedback have you had about the visual imagery that has been presented alongside that quirky nature of Plan D?
So the visual imagery fits perfectly with the text. The two go together, and that's what really made us stand out. Again, if I look at my colleagues' work, some great work, but they haven't quite nailed it in the way we have.
Thanks.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Well done. Yeah, excellent campaign. Where we've got the high engagement with domestic audiences on page 119, 281% for Auckland-based traffic. I imagine that's what you're seeing for your CROs or your ROI for your digital marketing. But is that translating into people actually coming here? Does that mean that most of the domestic visitors we're getting are from Auckland, Christchurch, and obviously not Dunedin because we live here?
Yeah, I think the evidence that was presented in the eyesight report clearly shows that Auckland and Wellington and Christchurch to a lesser extent are very important to us. and that's backed up by some other work we can obtain from Data Ventures around Data Ventures and another process called Triptech, which is where people, are coming from. So that definitely backs all of that up.
Do you think I don't know, we might not even know this, but that some of these people are coming here because they've got a connection maybe through the university, like if they've got kids at university or something, is that, and they're now perhaps staying longer, making it into a holiday, whereas before they might have dropped them off and left, but because they can't go overseas, they're staying on here. Could that be possible?
Yeah, we certainly recognise the importance of alumni and those people that have been to Dunedin in whatever capacity before, and the opportunity for them to come back and stay. And we're nudging 1.9 visitor nights on average. We can't quite get it over 2.0, but we're working pretty hard to achieve that.
Thank you.
You don't wish to speak, or you do?
I still can't get my head around the 352 million for this last year. That's the biggest of the 3 years. And yet the local tourism operators would say that they're still having a hard time of it. So if that number is so big and it's not going through the tourism operators, I'm not doubting the number, where's it going or how is it generated?
So if you look at some of the work that Infometrics and others do, it's typically generated in food and beverage, retail, passenger transport, accommodation, and so on. It's not necessarily just tourism products. If you take it as a one entity, it covers the whole range of tourism.
And in food and beverage, how can you tell it's a visitor?
That's a comment from the report. I couldn't answer that, I'm sorry.
Okay, so that's why the number's high, yet the tourism operators are still noticing that their bookings are low.
Tourism operators are a component of the overall tourism and visitor spend, yes.
And hotels, I mean, they're also
Sure.
still got a mothballed one. Yeah.
They can measure it through credit card spend too, Councillor. That's one way that we're tracking it.
I've had indication from Councillor Walker that he would like to move the recommendations, and seconded by Councillor Gary. Do you wish another question, Councillor Houlihan? Okay.
Thank you. So with regards to accommodation, would you say right now with the amount of hotels, because we've had some new hotels pop up, which is great, do you think that's adequate for what you see coming up in our future, or is there still quite, I mean, it's, I suppose, crystal ball gazing question, but are we squeezed at the moment, or is, do you think we've got an adequate supply?
So some of the current hotel stock are doing very well, 80 or 90%. On average, it's below 50% month on month, but the opportunity exists in the future to look at where tourism might be in the future. So there is a big opportunity there, I think.
Thank you.
Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Malcolm. The problem we have is that correlation isn't causation, which means you can't prove that the campaign had anything to do with this, nor can you prove that it didn't. But I'm interested in your view from the destination marketing point of view. When, particularly in the New Zealand context, when would you anticipate seeing the results of a campaign turn around? Because it's not necessarily, people aren't going to jump on a plane next week because they saw an ad in the Sunday Star Times, for example, but how long a game is this generally?
That is a hard question to answer. I would anticipate that we'll be looking in spring to see where the market is heading and whether we need to change tact in any capacity, domestically and or Australia, for example. It's a hard question to answer.
Councillor Houlihan.
Sorry, just following on from that, Australians, what are we seeing since that, GAP pathway has opened up? Are we benefiting from that,
So in general, most of the flow, as the figures from a couple of weeks ago, 39,000 New Zealanders left and 30,000 Australians came into the country. We would expect that to increase the other way during the Australian school holidays, especially out of Queenstown. So part of our marketing initiatives are to target Australians in Queenstown. What happens in the future? around Australia will, I think, depend entirely upon what happens with COVID-19 and people's appetite. Now that visiting friends and relatives is still the key opportunity at the moment, it's when that switches into leisure travel. That will be the interesting question.
Do we have any way of knowing what the benefits would be of, say, like that segment, the video segment we had on the Good Morning show in Australia, what the flow on of that might be? Because the woman was just raving about our city. It was fantastic coverage.
Yeah, it was great coverage. They can tell us the reach that obtained, and we'll certainly get that from them. And that's what we do in any campaign. So if we put an advertisement in Kia Ora magazine, we know how many people read that. If we have a video playing on Air New Zealand planes, we know how many people could see that. So we can measure all of those outcomes. That's a reasonably simple process, and it follows the work that TNZ does in the same space.
How did we manage to get that Good Morning coverage? Was that us through our own marketing from ED, or did they approach us seeing our innovative campaign, or what? Like how did that come to fruition?
It's a collaboration with Tourism New Zealand, and so they're going around to other regions as well in the South Island in this case. Okay. But they certainly love Dunedin.
Great, thank you.
It's been moved by Councillor Walker and seconded by Councillor Gary. Councillor Walker, do you wish to speak to this?
Yeah, I will do briefly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Mr. Anderson states, well done to all of the team who've been working on this, and including Brand Aid, actually, was a company we should be proud of in Dunedin. And as the Mayor states, it is always extremely difficult to absolutely quantify the effects, positively or otherwise, of any marketing campaign. And I'm certainly no marketing expert or media guru, but I can decipher and draw conclusions from some of the information that we've had presented to us and comment from there. As we've read, the media coverage across all channels has been extensive, with an estimated audience of over 5 million, which is fairly impressive.
Point of order.
Sorry, but I do believe that comment to be incorrect on saying that we don't know how well that campaign is going, because in any marketing you can follow, like for example, Malcolm gave the examples of where people had referred to that campaign and how, not fully, but in most good campaigns, you can, particularly if they're digital, you can monitor it all through the analytics. It's very clear to see where you're getting pickup. And I mean, you saw some of that in the fact they said 281% for Auckland-based. So we are getting tracking.
Councillor Houlihan, I have heard you.
Thank you, sorry.
There is tracking, but as I understand it from the previous comments from Malcolm, you can never tie it completely. So the indications are, but you can't say that it's all a fact. So I won't uphold the point of order.
Thank you. Just to reiterate as well, just to make it clear, it's simply saying that it's hard to absolutely quantify exactly where that may or may not work. As I was saying, so media coverage has been excellent with over 5 million, audience of 5 million. Excellent level of market breakthrough, which is always a good estimate of how well you've done. Almost 1 in 5 in Canterbury and Wellington. That's really impressive. 81% of people strongly agreed or disagreed that the ads are intriguing and make me want to find out more about Dunedin. That's an excellent stat. And 65% strongly agreed or agreed that ads make them more likely to want to visit Dunedin. And I think it would probably be wise of us to finish on the words of Nigel Douglas, who's CEO at Omnicom Media Group, a man of great media agency esteem, when he says, in my somewhat qualified opinion, this is the best tourism campaign in market around COVID-19 to date. Well done, top marks from me. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Walker, you've stolen my line, but I'll come to that in a moment. It's a far cry from a time when, about 2 years ago, when the call from our community was to increase the proportion of international visitors in relation to the proportion of domestic visitors, and aren't we glad that we weren't in that situation? You only have to look at Queenstown. It's very heartening to see the total visitor spend from 2019 of 319 million up to the end of April 2021 to 352 million, and that speaks volumes. But just a reminder to colleagues that the campaign was not for us, it was for those who live outside of the city. And at the time there was a hue and cry from some in the community around the campaign, and they weren't sure about it. Others thought it was great. Well, it wasn't for us, it was for others, and it has been highly effective. Personally, I absolutely loved the images, and I loved the self-deprecating style. I think it fits our city really well. And the follow-up campaign for the winter of anything but quiet, anything but dreary, anything but dull, anything but dark. It's clever. It caused me to chuckle, and it certainly caught your attention. So this has been a resounding success in my view. And it supports that idea of this being a destination, not only for visit, but for live, for study, and for business. I want to finish by saying to Nigel Douglas's comments, hear, hear. Congratulations to the team. This has been a triumph.
Councillor Elder.
I too want to say this is a triumph. And to me, something that was said was about Dunedin brand. And Dunedin has a quirky branding, which is Gothic print. Now we have a quirky campaign, which shows Dunedin at its best. The visuals are fantastic. The words around those visuals, intriguing. And what I also note is that in a lot of ways this is about also Dunedin pride in itself. A lot of people hadn't seen those images and thought about those places to go, even in Dunedin. And I imagine that local visitation to local tourism places was increased by this. The regional reach would have pulled more people through, and we also know the domestic reach was very successful. So go the Dunedin brand, and may we always be a little bit different.
Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sometime around about 10 years ago, the city was on the hunt for a new slogan to follow on from I am Dunedin, or it's all right here, or whatever had preceded it. And a fair amount of money and time was put into that project, and the end result was the decision that we don't need one. And I was critical of the money that was invested in coming to a decision about not doing anything at the time, but in hindsight it was absolutely the right decision, because they're always cringeworthy to a greater or lesser degree, and I think to make the decision that what the city is can stand alone and stand for itself was a vote of confidence in what we have to offer. And similarly, I think the decisions that have been taken around this campaign to be confident enough and brave enough to wear the personality of our community as a strapline in which we use as a strapline which we use to sell it is certainly risky, but it was absolutely the right thing to do in a crowded market where everyone is clamouring to get the same business as we recover from COVID-19. Cut through was absolutely critical for this to get anywhere, and that is absolutely what we achieved. And on the back of this, I know certainly around the launch of this, I was asked to do primetime media interviews on both sides of the Tasman as a result of the campaign that we put together, which were opportunities that never would have existed otherwise. I had an interview with someone on radio in Gosford, of all places, home of the Vodafone New Zealand Warriors, and he asked me at that stage how it was received locally The comment I made was that it seemed to be split in terms of local reception between the people who got the joke and the people who insisted on taking it very, very literally. And his response to that was, well, at least it's a good filter for who you want to come and visit your city. And I think wearing our heart on our sleeves in that degree is something that we should be confident enough to do when we're managing our destination marketing and certainly support the work that staff are doing in helping lead that. It's not easy. It can be a fairly brutal process to be a part of when you're in the crosshairs of public opinion. But I think holding the line and sticking with this has been absolutely the right thing to do. And to thank all the staff who've been involved in doing the work. Thanks.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I think that, that at the time when Plan B came out, there was comments on social media that people said, oh, look at this, putting down our city, doing this, doing that. And I think to those people who said that, the success of this campaign says it all, really. So I applaud our marketing team for taking a risk, doing something different. And I've said this before, but it reminded me of a campaign I was involved in years ago with Saatchi and Saatchi, and we were promoting book tokens. And instead of looking at a book, we were taking people on the journey that they were doing, that they'd get from a book. So there was images of astronauts, there was images of people doing all sorts of different things, saying that, a book will take you outside of your norm. And what we've done, I think, with this clever campaign is done exactly that, is take people away on a journey where they look at that and they go, oh, wow, that's really cool. But giving them a bit of a laugh at the same time to laugh at us and go, oh, look, they're silly old Dunedin, they're way down the bottom of the list. And, when they look at those photos, they go, oh, well, this looks fantastic. I want to go see more about it. And I just think it's fantastic. So thank you for everyone who did it. Awesome.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, echoing most people's comments, I think this campaign has been a triumph of creativity. And from my perspective, it's certainly enabled me to see some of the Dunedin iconic places that I've visited many times with fresh eyes and a renewed degree of attractiveness. So I think when it's speaking to the locals in that way, it's a real measure of its success, and naturally it's spoken to people from all around the country who have come and spent their money here. It's absolutely a triumph.
Just before I give Councillor Walker his right of reply, it's all been said, I guess, but in my memory, from my time of being on council and even before, this campaign to me has really stood out. And what a time to have a belter of a campaign when you are coming out of the throes of COVID. Lots of very expensive advertising agencies strive to get those ads that will get the cut through, that people will notice. And good old Dunedin has got on the list, in my opinion, of one of those ads that's really done the business. And so congratulations to the team, to the artistic team. Councillor Walker, your right of reply.
Very brief. I think everything that needs to be said has been eloquently covered, but thank you, Your Worship, for the reminder. It's all right here how times have changed. Thank you.
All right, councillors, I will put it. All in favour? Against? That's carried with acclamation. Last item on our agenda, items for consideration by the Chair. Are there any items? If not, I will declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everyone.